and welcome to the April 2023 meeting of Montgomery County Planning Commission. I have the pleasure of chairing this morning as our fearless leader is on holiday. Peanut Gallery is very excited and chatty, and we welcome you too. Do we have any board comments? We have Nicole and John in the room with me, and we have Bob, John, and Jill on Zoom, and we're hoping that Obed will be able to join us in person. Good morning,
folks.
Good morning, Jill. Okay, very good. Okie dokie. We'll put out the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any comments or additions for those minutes? Well done again, Karina. Thank you. Do I have a motion? Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
If we have public comment, we will entertain any comments from our public at this time. Hearing none, we'll move on to our agenda. And I'm going to ask Matt Edmonds to set us up for the bus revolution. Great. It's very quiet, right? It's not a quiet revolution, but it's been a long revolution. And we're interested in.
But either way, it is a revolution.
It is a revolution.
Just keeps going around and around. Good morning, board. Good morning, public. Just want to give a little bit of background here before we turn it over to our colleagues at SEPTA. It was about 11 months ago, May of last year, that we had the SEPTA Bus Revolution team here before the board to give an introduction to two things: reimagining regional rail and bus revolution. Both of those are two sides of the same coin. SEPTA's attempt to remake their vast transportation networks into something resembling how people live and work and play in today's environment, especially post-COVID. And bus revolution is the focus of today's meeting, so we're not going to get into reimagining regional rail. But a year ago, when the SEPTA team came in, they talked about what their vision was, some of their early outreach efforts, where they were headed with it. And here we are almost a year later, and they've done extensive work to release a draft initial version last fall. They heard a lot of input even after they came to the board, and they released a draft network in the fall. Then they got more input, heard more from the public and from Montgomery County residents, and now they just recently revised their draft and put that out for public consumption. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity to bring them back to talk about what the draft network looks like, how they responded to public comment. And so I want to introduce two people. Dan Nemiroff is essentially the manager of the Bus Revolution effort at SEPTA. And then Ryan Judge, who's the director of strategic planning. Both of them work together. They're in the same department, and they're the ones that are overseeing at different levels of the Bus Revolution effort. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
Thanks. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Nemiroff. I work for SEPTA in the Office of Strategic Planning and Analysis. I am the project manager for Bus Revolution, which is SEPTA's first comprehensive redesign of its entire bus network. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to kind of set the stage a little bit, talk about why we're doing this project. I'm going to focus primarily on what we heard from the last round of engagement when we released our first draft last fall. And then I'm going to go through the updated draft. There are some things that we've changed that we want to bring everyone's attention to. I'll go through different parts of the county. It's a big county with a lot of different sort of focus areas of service. So I'm going to go through each area, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, I hope. So just real quick, SEPTA is, for the first time ever, holistically looking at its bus network. A lot of our system has stayed the way it is for decades, since before SEPTA started operating in the early 60s. We've made some changes. We've made changes around the edges, Northeast Philly and the suburbs, but a lot of the core parts of our network running on the same streets, sometimes with the same numbers they have for decades. Not anything inherently wrong with this, but transit agencies do from time to time need to kind of take a step back, holistically look at their system and see how it's performing, particularly in a region that's changed as much as ours has over the last few decades. But the primary catalyst for this is our ridership and ridership losses specifically. We started looking at redesigning our bus network in the mid-2010s because we were noticing that ridership was dropping every year. We really started being serious about this project 2015 and 2016 range. But really what we were seeing was uniform losses throughout the whole system. We weren't gaining ridership in one area and losing it in another. We were just losing ridership everywhere. And at the time, TNCs were a fairly new thing, eating into some of our core business probably. But we worked with a different consultant to kind of do a city focused project. And the recommendation was to look at redesigning our network. The ridership losses continued into the latter part of the 2010s. And then obviously the pandemic started and that has really exacerbated the issue. It's totally changed travel patterns. People are going to new places. People aren't going places at all because they're working from home. And while bus ridership has been returning faster than other modes, still about 30 to 40% below 2019 levels. So this in effect means that we have some routes in our system that have lost about 60% of their ridership in a decade. This is obviously not a sustainable situation for SEPTA. We do need to figure out ways to make our system more useful for more people. This project is part of that suite of SEPTA forward initiatives that are sort of moving us in that direction. So we started the project in 2021. A lot of other transit agencies have done projects like this. It's not exactly like ours, but has a similar approach. We started with an existing conditions analysis, which led us into identifying opportunities and scenarios for two different potential networks. We got feedback on those two draft networks last spring, and then last fall released our first draft. We got a ton of feedback on that. We made a ton of revisions based on that feedback, and where we are now is sharing our updated draft network. We do have a lot of work left to do throughout 2023, but the plan is to go to hearing later this year, probably in the fall, seek board adoption by the end of the year, and then implement the network next year. So here's what we heard from the last round of engagement. And there were some core themes based on that draft. Some of them are not as germane to the county as they are to the city. The vast majority of feedback we got was from residents and users in the city, which makes sense because that's where most of our users are. But there were some themes that I do think are worth pulling out here. We heard a lot about transferring. We have a transfer heavy system already, but a lot of people are used to not transferring. They're used to being able to take one bus the whole trip. And they were not as interested in switching to a different bus, or in some cases to the Broad Street or Market Frankfurt lines. We heard a lot of feedback about specific routes or route segments that we were proposing for elimination. We heard a lot of feedback about personal safety and security, access to schools, and then frequency, weekend service, and then simplicity versus the current network. Like I said, a lot of people were unhappy about being forced to transfer or us asking them to transfer. So we did look really closely at instances where we were pushing transfers, and we really focused on the length of the trips. And we did make a lot of changes based on this. People use our system to make very short trips. So we want to make sure people can still make those short trips. And then we also heard a lot about the numbering. The numbering has always been sort of in flux. It was intended as a placeholder system, but we know we are going to make some changes, but we don't exactly know what they are yet. So we have updated this draft so that it includes the current numbering, so it's a lot clearer for people as they go and provide feedback for us. But we did want to retain some aspects of the draft network. People did like the increased frequency and the consistency, particularly in the suburbs where there's routes that don't operate on Sundays. We are aiming for a 7-day-a-week system, so people can use the system on Sundays, Saturdays, as well as during the week. This does track with sort of travel trends where traditional peak hour ridership and sort of work trips have been going down, but sort of discretionary trips or alternative trips are going up. So we want to be able to provide service during those times so that we can attract riders during those times. People like the overall simplicity of the network. We have a really complicated bus network. We make a lot of turns. We operate on a lot of really narrow streets. So being able to operate on wider right of ways, where we can more clearly delineate sort of this is a bus corridor. Riders did respond to some of that. There were some, criticism as well, but overall people appreciated that. And then we really focused on connectivity, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but we want to provide new connections. The reason people aren't using the bus network, amongst others, is that it's not taking them where they need to go. So we want to be able to provide new connections for them so they can get to more places faster. So now I'm going to go through different parts of the county. I'm not super familiar with all of it, but I'll try my best. But I do want to just, before I get into that, just sort of comparing the existing bus network. So this is what we're running today versus the updated draft. So we have about 100, seems wrong, but we have almost the same number of routes, but some of these are route patterns. We have, but a much higher overall investment in frequency. So buses coming 15 minutes or better, 7 days a week. We are still proposing to introduce 8 on-demand microtransit zones in the region, some of which are in the county, and which I'll get into here. And it's still a budget neutral project. So we're not adding revenue hours. We're not reducing revenue hours. We are looking to sort of reallocate them en masse. So I'm going to start in Norristown. Conveniently, that's where we are. So I think Norristown, in my opinion, is a clear winner in this project. It's one of our most, it's an area of really high ridership, even compared to some other parts of the city. There's a high need population. There's a lot of different routes that currently go through there. So we are proposing some streamlining and some simplifying of service, but we are still providing like strong regular service both to and through Norristown. The core of the service in this area is a 15 max route that would connect Plymouth Meeting to King of Prussia Wall through Norristown. This would be a 15 max, so it would run 7 days a week during 15 minutes or better. And we think this is going to be a really important route so that people that are in this region, both residents but also people that are commuting, can kind of switch to this route to get to all of these different locations. 30 max service to Lansdale and the Montgomeryville Mall, 30 max service to Audubon via Egypt and Trooper Road, and then some lower frequency routes. So there are more sort of 60 max routes in this network than there were in the previous one, because it's something that we heard pretty clearly that people want they still want some of that low frequency service. In some situations, we put back fixed route where we had proposed on-demand service before. And then we still have an on-demand zone in Norristown connecting the transportation center to Einstein Medical, the Plymouth Meeting Mall, and Bluebell. So there are some additional fixed routes that operate in that area. They're all very low ridership, and we think this on-demand zone will provide that sort of not just service to those destinations, but also some local connectivity for people sort of going to businesses within Norristown. King of Prussia, moving on. Again, King of Prussia has that 15 max service through Norristown to Plymouth Meeting. We're retaining the express service between Center City and King of Prussia, but we are still proposing to move it to 30th Street rather than have it operate from Center City or like the core of Center City, 13th and Market. We'll still operate the trips via Wissahickon to King of Prussia and points beyond. 30 max service from King of Prussia to Plymouth Meeting via Conshohocken, and then 30 max service to Phoenixville Live Oak. So these are big frequency improvements for some of these routes. And then a 60 max route replacing parts of routes 92 and 204 service to Exton via Sweetsford Road and Lancaster Avenue. Plymouth Meeting and Conshohocken, a lot of the same similar routes. We are proposing to retain the connection between Center City and Plymouth Meeting via Route 27. We got a lot of feedback from residents in the Roxborough area about this route, so we wound up putting it back in. We are also going to provide the 30 max service between Chestnut Hill and Plymouth Meeting via Germantown. So this is for people coming from sort of the North Philadelphia area who are currently riding the Route L all the way. We are going to be asking them to transfer now, but with more frequent service. And then service between Plymouth Meeting and KOP via Conshohocken, and then a 60 max route to Plymouth Meeting via Ridge Pike and Chemical Road. Willow Grove. So one of the interesting things that we looked at earlier on in the project, we looked at kind of travel flows and where we were missing, really high volumes of trips. And one of the things that we saw really clearly was, in sort of the Willow Grove kind of North Montgomery County area, the, Cheltenham and Up Abington area, there's a lot of people that travel from Northeast Philadelphia just west. And we didn't have any bus routes that really did so on a regular basis. So we are proposing a few different connections that'll meet those needs here. Willow Grove get some service, and then we're also proposing to put some service at Glenside. We're still providing service to the UPS facility, service along Welsh Road, like I said, to Northeast Philadelphia. Those are all new services. 30 max service between Fern Rock and Torresdale via Cheltenham. There's also going to be a brand new bus route on Cheltenham Avenue, which obviously is the border between the city and the county. And then a 60 max service between Torresdale, Cotman, and Glenside via Cotman and Township Lines. This is similar to today's Route 77. So I think Willow Grove is another area that's going to get, there is ridership there. We see demand towards increasing some of the connections, particularly from Northeast Philadelphia. Lower Marion, we are proposing 30 max service on Lancaster Avenue between 69th Street and Radnor. This is a consolidation of routes 105 and 106. We move all the service to Lancaster Avenue. We are proposing to retain service along Montgomery Avenue that the 44 currently has, but we are not proposing to run the 44 as an express route. Nor are we proposing to retain the service at Narberth or Gladwin. We are proposing to reroute Route 103, which originates in Ardmore and goes to 69th Street to the airport through Delaware County. And then we are proposing to strengthen the service on City Avenue, which is the 65, which is the highest ridership route along that corridor. I know it operates sort of in the city and in the burbs, but it is the highest ridership route out there. So we want to strengthen that. Lansdale, 30 max service between Montgomeryville, and Lansdale and Norristown, and then a 60 max route between Chestnut Hill and Montgomeryville Mall, similar to today's Route 94, and then an on-demand zone connecting Lansdale to Souderton and Telford. This would replace fixed route service in that area. So that's just kind of a quick overview. I know I went through it, but we can sort of go through it more carefully if you have questions. But really, what are the impacts? So how does this updated draft affect people in Montgomery County? So one of the ways we're measuring the efficacy of the changes is we're using isochrone mapping. So how far people can get in a given amount of time using transit and walking. So here I break down the number of people within 45 minutes of walking and transit weekdays at noon. Because our schedules are proposed to be pretty consistent throughout 7 days, you can see this is likely an improvement during all off-peak travel times. Peak tends to be a little more flat because we are running very high. We tend to run more frequent service in the peak throughout the system, even if it's not needed. But you can see the blue is the current, and then the gold is the update. So Conshohocken and Norristown, both, a lot more people are within walking distance of transit of these areas, 41 and 39% respectively. King of Prussia is not as big of an increase because King of Prussia already has a lot, very high number, high level of service. But a lot of people, but we are still, making improvements, pretty significant improvements in the county there.
I don't understand. 45 minutes. Explain that again.
Right. So this is the number of people that can access transit within these areas.
So
Within
can walk 45 minutes to get to a bus stop?
It's the number of people. Oh, you know what? Sorry. This is the number of people that can get to these locations within 45 minutes. I said that incorrectly. So this is the number of people that can get to all of these locations within 45 minutes.
And the percent is.
And the percent is the increase.
The yellow.
Percent is the increase in the yellow. I said that wrong. Thank you for correcting me there. So it's the number of people who can get to, King of Prussia, for example, within 45 minutes. It's a 3% increase in the updated network versus the current network. in Conshohocken, it's a 41% increase. The number of people who can get to Conshohocken, get to like the business.
Oh, so it's a
district.
combination of walking and
Yeah.
transit for 45
Yeah.
minutes. That's very unclear.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's what you're thinking.
Yeah.
It sounds like they have to walk
Yeah,
45
yeah.
minutes to get to.
No,
Right.
yeah. No, do you,
Yeah, I can.
no, thank you for pointing that out. I'll make sure to update that on future slides, but it's the number of people who between transit and walking can get to these locations within 45 minutes.
Gotcha.
Sorry about that.
Yep.
Yeah, are you good?
I'm
Okay,
good.
okay.
I'm good.
So this is a different one, but I'll explain this one better. So this is the number of jobs accessible within 45 minutes from these specific locations, using walking and transit weekdays at noon. So this is like if someone is starting their trip in Bryn Mawr, now they have an increase of 31% in the number of jobs they can get to within 45 minutes based on the new network. So Bryn Mawr and Norristown, big increases. Warriorsburg, not as big an increase. But I wanted to measure it because we are proposing to replace fixed route service with some on-demand service. So you can see, even though we are proposing that replacement, we are still making some, subtle improvements to folks using transit in that area.
And would you define on demand?
Sure. So, and I should have had a slide about this, but as part of Bus Revolution, we are proposing to implement microtransit or on-demand service. So what that means, it's sort of like Uber or Lyft, but for transit. So rather than having a fixed route that has to stay on a schedule that can only go into certain locations, people using this as service can travel anywhere within a specified zone. So let me go back a little bit. Here, let's use this one. So what it would be is like if anybody who was in this zone could use the on-demand service, and they would use their phone or they could call in, and a vehicle would come get them, not necessarily at their house, but at a designated pickup point, and it would take them anywhere within the defined zone. So whereas like a bus route can only go where it's scheduled to go, this on-demand vehicle, because it's a smaller vehicle, it's a van, it's 14, 15 people, it can go into more locations. It can go into different shopping centers. It can take them to different appointments and things like that. And it's not a fit for every location. It's really a substitute for low ridership, low productivity, fixed route service. So you would not put it in the city. You wouldn't even put it necessarily in denser parts of the suburbs where we are proposing higher frequencies of service. But if a bus route couldn't even support like a 60-minute service, we often proposed replacing it with on-demand
And it would be
service.
competitive, cost-wise?
Yeah, it's the same price as
Same as
SEPTA.
SEPTA.
Yeah.
So it would be different from calling a Lyft driver.
Yes, it would be significantly cheaper.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be the same price as SEPTA, and it would be it would work with the key. So if you were using it, for example, to transfer from a bus or from regional rail, you could do so, and we have our first transfers are free now in our system, so that it would be part of that policy as well.
So how do you let the ridership understand that on demand means 15 minutes, 20 minutes? How do you determine that?
Right. So that's a really good question. So we planned this system out with a 30-minute response time. And we've costed it out. We've built our vehicle specs based on that 30-minute response time. Each zone is a little different. I think there's some subtle refinements that they all will require going forward to make sure we're hitting the destinations within each zone that we think makes sense. But we have to be careful. We can't make them too big because that makes it harder to meet that 30-minute response time. There's going to be a lot of education that goes into this because this is a new type of service. It's in a lot of areas where there might be some digital divide issues and people are not necessarily super familiar with using a service like Uber or Lyft because they don't really operate in those areas very much. But we think this is ultimately a better fit.
Would it be a last mile type of?
It can be used for different things. And I think, like I said, like each zone is going to be a little different. So I think this is a situation where, because it connects to the Lansdale station, you could envision some last mile benefits here. But that's not the case everywhere necessarily.
What's last mile? I mean,
Let's say you work your corporation, your manufacturing location is a mile from the train station. You can get to the train station, but you can't make that last little bit.
Oh, I gotcha.
So hopefully you could do this and maybe you could schedule it more consistently. Is that in there or not?
That's not really how it works. It really is like an on-demand service, but somebody who does, you know, if it's a trip they make regularly,
Right.
I think that's an option that we can look into.
Because I would think some people would want that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, and there are situations certainly where we have companies that are located out that are providing shuttle service
I
and
was
things
gonna say
like
that
that,
would be awesome.
which is different, but
Right.
you know, this is a situation where you could use it for both the first mile, last mile, but also just to travel within the zones. So you don't necessarily need to be transferring from fixed route or rail or what have you. But you could be, and you know, it certainly would be accessible to those people. And just to reconfirm, it would be the same price as a SEPTA bus fare. All right, so we have a lot more work to do. We kicked off our engagement for this updated draft last week with a bunch of events. So we are sort of using some things that we've learned throughout the process. We are going to bring our project bus back. If you've seen it, we have a bus that's wrapped. We're bringing it to different locations throughout the region. We updated our materials so that they're a little bit easier to understand. It's highly technical material, but we need to do a better job of communicating with folks. We want to make sure people understand what is included in this update versus what's not included. Based on some of the feedback we've gotten thus far, people are still commenting on things that we've, you know, sort of decided not to do already, but that's on us to communicate better. And then we're really focusing on individual routes and making sure people understand what we're doing. Most of our information, we get most of our feedback through our project site, maps, route by route information, descriptions of changes by geographic areas. Again, we're really focusing on just people go to the website, they can try to immediately find what it is they're looking for. We'll be providing weekly updates based on some of the feedback that we've gotten throughout this process. We're doing webinars. We have usually what we've done is we do one focused on each sort of geographic part of the city and then one focused on each county. Because we consolidated this engagement phase, we're doing all the counties on May 8th. But we have these are really opportunities for us to go really like kind of deep in the weeds for like throughout the update, you know, ask questions, that kind of thing. So we had the first one last week. I didn't have one this week, but we have 4 more starting Monday. The project bus, we started last week. We did events Tuesday and Wednesday. We did Norristown and the Plymouth Meeting Mall last week. We'll be back in the county on the 26th at Willow Grove. We're focusing on locations where we know we can park a bus for a few hours. So that's why we're picking these locations. If you have other ideas, you know, we're happy to hear them. And just to kind of give you a little more insight on kind of what happens next. Through May, we'll be wrapping up the community engagement and we will transition to the kind of recommendation stage of the project. Over the summer, we will finalize the network and begin preparing the materials for hearings. And then we'll begin the hearings in the fall. Our goal is to have the hearings in September. You know, probably begin right after Labor Day and have, you know, rather than, you know, have one hearing at 1, 2, 3, 4 Market, which is how we typically do it. Our plan is to have hearings throughout the region so people can more easily access the public hearings. There also will be a virtual way for people to participate in the hearings. We'll wrap the hearings up by the end of September, and then you know, again, we might have to make some revisions based on that. But the plan is then to go to the SEPTA board by the end of the year. And that's it.
No. Is Ryan also giving, or is Ryan's just?
answers questions or anything. like that.
Oh, okay, great. I didn't know if we needed to hold our questions. I have. Well, maybe I'll ask Jonathan and Nicole if you have questions. Our Zoom folks. Anyone have a question?
I have a couple. So what are you doing to address safety?
So a lot of the safety concerns that we heard from the initial round of the project were specific to folks that we were asking to transfer to the Market Franklin line. And one of the things that we've done is we've sort of backed away from some of those initial recommendations. Market Frankfurt line is, frankly having issues right now. I'm a daily user of it, so I'm very well aware of the issues. So we backed away from a lot of that. However, there were some issues related specifically to kind of people waiting out on the street, not just about being asked to transfer or what have you, but just standing, standing in a corner or whatever. And so we are working to identify, we're working mostly with the city because again, most of those comments came through the city. We are working with the city to identify locations where we are introducing transfers or locations that are already high transfer locations to identify improvements that can be made. Shelters are one thing, but sometimes it's as subtle as lighting, that type of thing. So we are starting to identify those locations. We don't have because we don't install shelters, and the city has a contract that allows them to do so. It's a little bit, we have a different relationship with them than we do with some of our counties. But if you have ideas or issues you want to talk about, we're happy to kind of to talk to you about them.
Just note that one of the things that you said, people said this, I don't see anything about.
Yeah, no, one of the thing I'll highlight is our SCOPE program. And you might have read about this. But it is a program which is focused on safety and cleanliness, but also partnering with service agencies to help people that are, sort of, in the subway or in the system, to try to get them help that they need, to get them, maybe out of the system. So we do have a SCOPE program that we have people out, we have extra cleaning, we have, I don't know what we call them, the counselor. The counselors.
Yeah, we have counselors that
Yeah.
are out. We have a new deployment plan that we've been pushing out since about February, particularly on the Market Frankfurt line and the Broad Street line with police officers and social services agents that we have on hand. So they've been going through, we've been making announcements on board when they enter, so they have a very visible presence. They've been walking from train to train. We've been trying to set that program up so the odds are when you get on a train at some point during your trip, there's a police officer making rounds, checking in, having a very vocal presence on board as well as they go through that. That's led to a decrease over the first 2 months of that deployment plan and the types of complaints that we've been seeing, the quality of life issues and other things. So we like the way that's headed. We're going to keep moving that forward and make sure that visible presence is there as well.
Does SEPTA have its own police force?
We do, yes.
And what about, can you track where a bus is on your phone so you know when it's going to get to your stop? I think if you guys were here last year, I think I asked that question as well.
Yeah, we have that function today with both the SEPTA app, or if you use Google Maps or Transit app or any third-party app, that information is stuff we put out there free for everybody to pull into any app they use. We've been making some improvements to what's called the polling cycle of how frequently that updates. So currently it updates once every 25 to 30 seconds. So when a bus is moving, it can go fairly far in 25 to 30 seconds. We're trying to increase the frequency. So it's down to a 1 to 3 second range. So it's more like what you see in Uber and Lyft where it's moving in real time. So we're making those improvements. And then this summer, we'll be releasing a whole new mobile app and a new website that makes all of that a lot easier to use.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any questions from our board members on Zoom?
Hey, Dulcie, it's John. Thank you. Just a couple of general questions. Curious if other transit agencies around the country are experiencing the same type of decline in numbers that SEPTA is. And then as a follow-up to that, are they also looking at these type of on-demand service programs?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the transit industry overall has experienced losses over the last few years. I think SEPTA's been, I haven't looked at the stats for every agency. I think SEPTA's, particularly on the bus side, has been pretty resilient. I think, transit was, like I said, it was trending downward prior to the pandemic. And I think the pandemic exacerbated some of those issues. I think in terms of the on-demand specifically, I think agencies have been looking at on-demand for a while. And, and primarily as a replacement for very low ridership, low productivity, trips in sort of further out exurban areas, which are really hard to serve with fixed route transit. So I think that's a trend that we were starting to see in the mid 2010s. And I think it's become a lot more prevalent now. And you do see, Dallas and LA and other big agencies rolling out fairly extensive on-demand services. It allows us to use our fixed routes, our big buses in a more efficient way. But it allows us to still provide, some service in areas where it's needed. So yeah, I think that's a trend that started, in the mid 2010s again, and it's going to, I think, start seeding in a lot of other agencies as well.
Dan,
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, John, do you have a second question?
No, I would just this specifically with the on-demand program, if I were to call and need a ride somewhere, am I to anticipate that I would potentially be the only person in the vehicle that is being delivered by SEPTA, or are there going to be a couple of other people and SEPTA has to wait for a couple of phone calls to group everybody together to make it more efficient or something like that? Just curious.
No, so I mean, I think that's why you set a response time. You say it's a 30-minute response time, and you would call in, and if there were other people calling in at the same time, that could be programmed into that trip. The system would do so, but that's not necessarily. It wouldn't necessarily hold up your trip to make that happen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Dulcie.
Dan, what does the cessation of work on King of Prussia Rail do to your plan for servicing that area?
No, it's
I think a lot of the benefit to this project, more than a lot of these larger planning projects that happen at an agency like SEPTA, is that it doesn't require hard infrastructure to happen. So this has always been planned on a short timeline to be implemented next year, regardless of what happens with KOP Rail. So the service improvements to KOP Rail to KOP that Dan talked about earlier really reflect the demand for services in that area that we were trying to serve in the long term with KOP Rail, and to promote more of that sort of growth in the future with KOP Rail. The pause of KOP Rail doesn't really shift too much in this. We're going to take a
I'd
closer
like
look.
to say pause as opposed to cessation. I think that was carefully scripted. Yes, thank you.
We're going to take a closer look as we go through some of the feedback we're hearing now and make sure that the tweaks we've made to these routes are still serving and building towards what we see happening in King of Prussia in the long term. We did have that project happening in the later part of our horizon in mind while we did it, but there weren't really decisions made that were contingent upon KOP Rail in this project.
And the other question I have is, and I understand, and I appreciated last year's presentation and some of the things that we didn't ever think about. I mean, safety was one thing. I remember the discussion on the quality of the sidewalks and the safety of moving from place to place, which has never dawned on some of us who don't take public transportation. But the other issue is how in this new world when everything is changing, and I understand that change is to get to someplace really elevated and positive. Sometimes it's messy, and you guys certainly have experienced that, but you're forging ahead. How are you addressing the whole idea of changing what the perception of public transportation is so that you increase ridership in a world where we need to get places and find different ways than getting in our car?
That is a good question. Yeah. So what I alluded to earlier with the new mobile app and the new website are part of how we're trying to change that perception of making transit really modern and efficient and easy to use. There's a lot of barriers to using transit, whether it's the frequency of service, the connections where you need to go, the ability to pay or plan for your trip easily with an app. Those are types of things that we have to overcome to make transit more attractive to everybody. The reason why a lot of that ridership decline was happening in that 2013 to 2019 time period was because of Uber and Lyft, frankly. And when you think about it, they're nothing more than a fancy app for a taxi company, but they allow you to plan your trip, pay for it directly in there, monitor where your driver is, what their rating is, when you'll get where you're going to go, all of that in one seamless environment. So it's up to us to find ways to create not the same experience necessarily, but a very similar or equivalent type of experience. That's why we're focused on the app. That's why we're focused on real-time improvements. That's why we're focused on working with our partners on sidewalk connections and bus shelter improvements and all of that. So that environment and that experience is really seamless and high quality the whole way.
Thank you.
Question, Dulcie. I appreciate the conversation on, the comments received and some of the modifications that were made to the draft plan specific to Montgomery County and feedback you got from the residents. Kind of going into and starting this next round of review. Do you feel like you've gotten any feedback specific to Montgomery County, things people are looking for that maybe you can't provide for, that you kind of expect to keep hearing, just to kind of have an understanding of maybe what people are looking for? You can't do it all. I think we understand that, but I would be interested if there was anything that you received a little more significant feedback on that you just aren't able to work into the plan for Montgomery County.
I think, from the feedback we've gotten, and I think there are some clear, I think KOP, Ryan answered this, but I think, King of Prussia, Norristown, I think there are some clear benefits in those areas. I think where we heard a lot of feedback and where we haven't made adjustments where, for example, like we're not proposing to retain the 44 service running express, via, through Ardmore into Center City. I think that's something that we've heard feedback on. We made a lot of adjustments in Winfield, based on the feedback that we got from some folks there. But we didn't make that adjustment, primarily because it's a very low ridership route. We've retained express service elsewhere on routes where the ridership is like twice as high. And we don't think it's a route that's going to, we haven't been able to sort of figure out the math to bring it back at a level that would make it a useful service. And I think that's something we'll continue to hear about. We met a lot with folks in Lower Merion. I live in Lower Merion, so like a lot of people would run into them on the street. At times.
Your neighbors are.
And I think it's an area that has a lot of service. It has, it has regional rail service. It has, it still has bus service, but I think it's, that's an area where we made a lot of changes because the routes that were serving those areas were particularly inefficient, and ridership has really gone down on those routes. So that was really what led us to make those changes. So that's one area. I haven't seen a lot else in the data, in the feedback we've gotten thus far, in the county, but we check it, every week, and, we'll make sure, when we reconvene the technical team, in May, we'll make sure, like we did last time, we'll go through the comments, line by line to make sure. And even if it's something that we can't ultimately do in the end, we'll at least have to consider it. Thank you.
Do you have guests in chat?
Okay, let's say.
Hi, this is Jill. I have a quick question. I was just wondering about the operators. Are these routes going to be open to the current operators? And then how are the vacancies going to be filled?
Yeah, I mean, this system would be replacing the current system. So we are working with our scheduling department, to make sure the run count stays the same so that we can fill the schedule. But yeah, it'll be just like with the way we currently pick now, we'll continue to do so. And we are still obviously hiring operators to try to run the current system.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else, Karina?
We have someone who wants to make a comment not related to SEPTA, but related to electric vehicle charging.
We can come back to that.
Come back.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll hear more about this as it progresses, and the tenacity of SEPTA dealing with this. I say thank you also, because it is tough. You're doing you have a very difficult task in a world that is very tumultuous. So hopefully the outcome will satisfy people on both sides. So thank you for visiting with us.
Dulcie, before you turn it if I can just give one note to the board that SEPTA's put all of these materials up on their Bus Revolution website. You can go and you can see that the new slider map up that shows you, where the routes are, where they are now, where they're going to be in the proposal, whether they're 30 or 15 or 60-minute max. You can also go in, and I would highly encourage this. You can go in and you can actually see proposals for how often the frequency would be at different times of the day, different times of the week. And it's really important that if any board members are really interested in this, to go through, use those tools and see the differences for yourselves and make a comment, right? Public comment is open. SEPTA is interested in hearing public comment. And so they're going to do a great job of going out to the riders and getting their input as well. But you certainly, as a planning commission board, have every right to, even if you don't use a certain route or use parts of the network, it's good for them to hear your voice as well.
Well, what Ryan said, I mean, when Uber came in, we all had to get comfortable with it. It took a while, and then it's not like, I have to use Uber, just call Uber. But we have to get that way with public transportation. So people go, oh, I have to get on the bus. They're comfortable getting on the bus. And that's going to demand a lot of change in technology and also education on both sides. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Now, is Barry with us?
We do have a member of the public who came on after the public comment who had a question.
Why don't we do that first?
There's a comment. Mr. Schultz, I believe.
Hi, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I have a situation in my townhome community that doesn't have a garage where the homeowners association is asking us to charge vehicles by putting a post approximately 30 feet from the vehicle and running in the power cord from it, putting the post, putting an outlet, running that cord across the grass and across the sidewalk to connect to the electric car. There are 8 states in the union that have right to charge where an HOA cannot stop you from installing a post at your designated parking spot as long as you meet building codes and NEC, the National Electric Code. I have a permit from Lower Pottsgrove Township to have done what I did install, which is a post 2 feet from where the car sets when it's in its parking spot. I have an insurance company that tells me if I do it the way the HOA wants me to do it, that they would not cover me if someone were injured via electric shock, electrocution, or tripping hazards. I have been in contact with Lower Pottsgrove Township. I spoke to Mr. Lesher yesterday, and I'm hoping that we can develop an ordinance somehow throughout our county and my township that prevents people from charging their cars with exposed cords like that because it's a danger. But the HOAs are a private entity to some degree, even though the state of Pennsylvania has laws that says they have to follow ordinances within their township. So what I've asked Mr. Lesher is, could we help Lower Pottsgrove develop this ordinance so that we don't have electric cables laying all over the place if we have 50 or 60 in my 130 unit development and other townhome communities as well.
Interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I spoke with Mr. Schultz a little while ago and initiated that when he called up with that concern. Just to be clear, I think as we've said, we can't write the ordinance for the county or the county-wide. The government structure doesn't allow us to regulate as a county. Lower Pottsgrove does have certain abilities, and we work on their contract. They request us to do specific work. I believe this was brought up, but I'm not sure where it stands as far as Lower Pottsgrove asking for our assistance in this issue. I don't think we have a direct ask right at this moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is percolating kind of as we speak, just because I know I did hear from both our planner that it came up and township mentioned it. So unfortunately, I'm not on the ground there, so I can't say specifically as to if we can fill that role. But I think if the township wants us to, I think that can be discussed as part of that contract, or to the extent that that issue can be regulated. There are some state things developing with electrical vehicles, and that's very fluent right now, or
So in process.
right.
But is this, to address Mr. Schultz's concern, is this something that we should begin to consider as a model ordinance?
Yeah, and we actually, John, if John's on
Unless
our
you're on.
audience, I think he's been in contact with DVRPC and working on regional approaches to what guidance can be out there, but I don't know if you can add anything specifically to that, John.
Can you hear me?
Yes, John.
Yes.
Awesome. Good morning. Yes, we are in conversations, not only myself, but Matt Popek and Edmonds in transportation. We are working with DVRPC on EV infrastructure studies. And we hope from that study will come work on some model ordinance language that we can help with our communities. But even before anything official comes out, we would be willing and able to help our municipalities with the guidance that we currently possess. So
I think it's really important. In my drive in this morning, I heard, and I forget, it was on NPR, but the forecast for the number of electric vehicles that are going to be manufactured in the next decade. I mean, the numbers are really, the government's going to be pushing.
That's my concern. That was one of my talking points when I spoke to Mr. Lesher, that we're heading that way. The manufacturer is going to put people in a position where it's going to be more prevalent that they'll be everywhere because of the number of cars that are going to be manufactured. So are we going to get ahead of this? I'm also working with people on the Senate. I'm working with Representative Ceresi to try and get something on the state level for a right to charge in Pennsylvania to prevent HOAs from, I don't know why these people would want it to be that way, but they have been belligerent and they've actually sued me. And I'm in a court battle with them about having it removed to do it the way they want to do it and me pay all their lawyers' fees. It's like $25,000 right now. But I do know that we can't allow the court to be laying all over the place. And as a community, whether it's on the state level, the county level, or township level, we have to address it because the future is here. It's not going away.
Well, thank you for bringing up the issue. We always welcome public comment, and this is something we need to look at, and that's what we'll move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Lesher has my contact information. If anyone would like to speak with me, you can reach out at any time via email or telephone. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Barry, let us know what's going on with Montgomery Awards. And what we can do to help, which is more important. Which is not more important, but which is very important.
So yeah, I'm here today to give a little bit of background about the Montgomery Award program and to ask the board staff for input. We're seeking nominations right now. They'll be open until May 8th. So we look forward to working with you to come up with some really good projects for 2023. First, a little bit about the Montgomery Awards. It recognizes, the award itself recognizes the best best in excellence in land developments, community planning efforts, transportation projects, open space efforts throughout our county. We also have the Planning Advocate Award that recognizes citizens or organizations who have made a sustained commitment to outstanding planning collaboration in the county. And then our final award is the Environmental Stewardship Award, which started in 2017, and we work with the Montgomery County Conservation District for this award, and it really focuses on soil and water conservation. So these are the categories we go through, and many of our projects have multiple characteristics and attributes in this, but we recognize good land developments, revitalization efforts, open space enhancements, transportation efforts and improvements, and environmental stewardship. This is our 56th year, so it's really a big deal. 235 projects since 1967. I'm gonna go through just a few of the projects to show you how they're considered and their characteristics. Just briefly, this is Lionsgate, awarded back in 2018, and it had multiple characteristics that of being an outstanding land development, being environmentally, had a lot of bioretention, really high quality bioretention efforts done around the front of the building. It helped to revitalize the street corridor because it was previously a vacant site. Another land development done recently was the Shell House Commons. it also overlaps in multiple categories, being a good land development, helping to revitalize Collegeville's streetscape by preserving a historic house, adaptive reuse of that house, and connecting it to a modern student commons, which have this really wonderful plaza and a multi-use parking lot adjacent. Another category is revitalization. This was our, an outstanding project we did last year. It is a Marriott hotel adjacent to the Riverfront Plaza. The Ironworks at Pencoed, it's really become a destination in the Lower Schuylkill River. So it utilized an old warehouse, preserved a lot of those elements along the river, and really gives you a great experience to be along the river corridor. Another revitalization effort was up in Schwanksville. This was the adaptive reuse of their firehouse. It included a lot of funding partners, including the county. As you can see, we helped with the Main Street Plaza. So it helped to revitalize their streetscape and provided a community benefit with a modern community offices complex. The open space, this was another significant project that helped preserve over 40 acres in Lower Marion, a historic estate that was repurposed as a public garden and a nature preserve. So it's another enhancement to the community and provided a significant community benefit. In the transportation category, these enhancements in Pottstown, which have really made access for the community much more prevalent and easy, and it represented a big collaborative effort between the borough, PennDOT, and the engineering to create this multi-use streetscape. Most recently, last year, the community impact has become an important category for us to consider. So last year, we recognized the Willows up in East Greenville. It's an adaptive reuse of a historic factory building. It's on the National Register now. They received a number of different grants and funds to repurpose this as a affordable housing complex. And it has a number of families that have relocated there, and it really served a big community purpose in providing affordable housing in an area that really needs it. In the environmental category, the Grove at Meadowood is over 130-acre campus, and it had great attributes for being an outstanding land development, as well as it provided enormous environmental benefits with this large bioretention pond that was executed in really a very thoughtful way. It provides benefits for its residents by being able to get outside and enjoy the wildlife and nature. And then along the Zacharias Creek, Meadowood did this restoration planting, added over 300 trees, and they have a community garden. So efforts like this are what we're looking for in our nominations. So I guess the key is that it has multiple attributes. And so the more attributes like this that we've seen, it rises to the top. So a little bit about the program. We do have award criteria. So we go through a process of vetting with our awards committee, our staff, with senior management here. We go through and vet and try to come down with a list of a smaller short list, so to speak. From that short list, we go out and visit each individual site. So every site that gets nominated gets a visit from staff. We photograph it, we put it into a matrix, we evaluate it there. From there, we actually, in mid-June or thereabouts, we will do a committee tour. And you can see this was our tour route last year. It took us from, a huge transect across the county from East Greenville all the way down to the urbanized area at Pencoed Landing. So we got to see a huge cross cross-section of the county. And so what our projects, this is a criteria and the things that we consider in evaluating the project. It has to have excellence in planning, innovative design, and it has to be implemented. So the project has to be built for it to be nominated. It should be complete.
Mary, it's important that when you go to take everybody out, lucky members of the Planning Commission board, if you're lucky enough to be on this committee, get to go with the staff who's done a lot of hard work to see these wonderful places and find the very best of them for our awards. So it's both our staff that works very hard and members of this board who get to choose.
Exactly. So we also look for community impact. The projects need to provide a good benefit to the community. So it can be social, economic, but it has to provide improved well-being and value over time. And also the partnerships, the process, was there engagement with the public? And how was the public engaged? And did it help to fulfill stated community plans or comprehensive plan goals? So we also recognize the planning advocate. That's someone that's, it could be an organization or a public official or a citizen who's made a sustained commitment and has made an outstanding contribution to advancing planning in the county. And this is some of the folks who have received it recently, most recently Tom Hilton last year. The last award that we work with, the Conservation District, is the Environmental Stewardship Award. And as I mentioned, it recognizes projects, the outstanding projects that have helped conserve water and soil. And this project was a collaboration between Merck, the Wissahickon Trails, and Upper Gwinnett Township, I believe, yeah. Upper Gwinnett Township, where they restored over 1,100 feet of this floodplain. It provided flood mitigation and improved aquatic habitat along the headwaters of the stream. So what are our next steps? We're asking for nominations now. We're just less than a month away, so they're due May 8th. The forms are available on our website. The next steps will be, we'll be evaluating those nominations once they're received, and we'll be doing a committee tour, putting together those sites. I should mention that what we select to visit in the tour is not necessarily what gets chosen. So oftentimes there's a lot of discussion, and these are just our considerations. So we're looking hopefully for at least three Montgomery Award winners or nominees that could be considered. One planning advocate, and of course the Conservation District will have their nomination. So I'll be happy to take any questions or.
Well, often we'll get from board members who know something that they have seen either in their community or through their work that is special, and to encourage people to apply. This is not an onerous application. That's really important for municipal officials or citizens who want to make nominations to understand. So, and if you have any questions, our staff is always willing to help. We just want the best nominations to come forth so we can have a wonderful array of winners.
Thanks. Thank you, Dulce.
Sorry, do you have an email that I can forward to people who I know are in the know about both development projects and conservation projects, who might then either fill out a nomination or pass it along to somebody?
Yeah.
Have something like that, you could email me or communicate.
We can, I can email you the link.
Okay,
Yeah.
super, thank you.
Okay. That does it. We'll look forward to the next step and a tour.
Excuse me, Dulcie.
Yes.
Hi, it's Bob. I have a
Bob.
question. As a board member, I have a project that I spoke with Patty Gutenplan last year about it, and she was excited. Is there any reason why my project would be conflicted out?
Not if it's a.
You mean,
Like a
Because of a-
conflict of interest, Bob?
I'm sorry?
Like a conflict of interest?
Well, I'm not, I mean, I don't vote on anything for the Montgomery Awards.
Right.
Yeah, if you're not on the committee, I would
Who's
think.
on the committee? Yeah, this is Jill. Who's on the committee?
Who's on, do we know?
I'm not this year, so I'm not.
Steve, yeah, Jonathan,
Right.
we are.
Interesting use of the word lucky.
Right.
No, I want to comment on
I'm
that.
sorry.
Interesting use of the word lucky when you talk about lucky board members.
Well, you know me, I have a lot of enthusiasm, but I enjoy seeing places in the county that I might not have seen on my own and hearing in depth about these projects. So I do. And you also get lunch.
Always a good lunch too.
You get a good lunch and it's not in a plastic container usually. So,
Bob, is it?
Hey, Bob, it's John.
John.
I've recused myself in the past from the process when Lansdale's had some projects up for nomination. So I believe it can be done as long as it's done, upfront and very public, discussion.
Yeah, if you're not on the committee, Bob, this year, that makes it very straightforward, I think.
I don't think
I'm
it's a
not- I don't believe I'm on the committee.
You're not.
You are now.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless Steve snuck it in when I wasn't attending
I
at
think
one
it's
point.
Steve Jonathan.
Yeah. Okay.
It's an interesting project. There was a somewhat of a brownfield.
Don't steal the thunder from the project. Let us hear it. You can't lobby for the project now.
I'm not lobbying, okay.
Good call, Dulcie.
I think
I'm
just let me know
sorry, Jill.
who the people are that, so I can send the tickets to Hawaii.
Thank you very much. No books or tickets.
Moving on.
Thank you. And well, the minutes reflect that Obed has joined us this morning. Thank you, Obed. Thank you. Okey doke. Now, one of my favorite projects, and I won't lobby. I'd like to welcome Kelsey Boyd from Natural Lands and Eric Jarrell from our agency, who was so welcoming to allow this collaboration that you will see has presented, that will be presenting a wonderful report and great work.
So everybody take a deep breath. It's a big study. I'm gonna try.
It was birthing an elephant.
It was. There was a lot of obstacles along the way, but we're there now. So I'm gonna go over sort of the whole study, and it is a lot of information. A piece involves natural lands, and Kelsey will step in and do that part of the presentation. And so there's board members that have been here and probably seen some of these slides before. Again, different updates that I've given over the years. So some of it will be repeat for them. For the newer board members, this will all be new. So I just figured it'd be good to just go back to the basics, cover the whole thing from the beginning and see where we are after that. So multi-regional Greenway and Stewardship study. This covered the 4 regional planning efforts that we have in Montgomery County. Again, just for review, we have the Upper Perkiomen Valley, 6 communities up there, basically the Upper Perk School District, Central Perkiomen Valley, the Indian Valley, which involves Telford, which is partially in Bucks County, and then the Pottstown region, which is the largest in land area, and also a number of communities. They have 8, which include 2 in Chester County, North Coventry and East Coventry. So that's basically the study area for the project. It involved 4 regional planning areas, 26 municipalities, again, 24 that are in Montgomery County, 195 square miles of land we looked at. The population of the 4 regions, about 170,000 and 66,000 housing units. Projected to grow about 17% in population, about 20% in the number of housing units by 2030. And so they are a growing part of the county. It's one of our more rural areas that are still developing. The regional plans did a great job and have for the last 20 years in establishing the growth boundaries, designating areas for growth and development where we have the infrastructure, both in sewer and water and roads, and then protecting the rural resource areas. So even though we're going to be seeing that fairly significant growth, it is going to be directed to the areas that can accept it the best. And again, it's been working tremendously in the regions. And I think we see that every year when we do the housing units built report, when it shows 98% of the units being built in the county are being built in our designated growth areas. And a large part of that, at least in the western part of the county, is due to the regional plans, because we were seeing a lot of development starting to occur in what are now the rural resource areas that has not happened over the last 20 years. So we did a great job in laying out the growth areas and the growth boundaries and looking at it from a land use and development perspective. But we wanted to start thinking broader. They recognize that the rural resource areas cross municipal and regional boundaries and meet up and create large areas of rural resource. And the greenways are an interconnected system that obviously run between municipalities and regions. And how do we look at those in a more holistic way? So they decided to join together. And the individual municipalities, and this was kind of a different perspective for each of the regions. Indian Valley was looking at greenway planning. Upper South had done a greenway study and they wanted to, and they liked it and wanted to basically upscale that to the region. Upper Perk and Central Perk were really interested in stewardship. They had purchased in all the communities in the county, really from the 1993 Open Space Initiative, they had bought a lot of land, a lot of open space, a lot of parkland, a lot of natural resource land. And it got to the point where they were really interested in how can we best manage this? It's starting to become an issue in terms of, getting our mowers out and our public works people out, and how can we better manage it, not only from our fiscal standpoint, but a way that's going to enhance the resource so that it maximizes its benefit to the natural environment. And so they were starting to go down that road. So, here we manage all the 4 regions. So we saw these different perspectives and we tried to find a way to bring them all together. How to manage the lands, how to look at greenway planning and make those connections. So we talked to the 4 regions, we got them together, we decided to do the multi-regional study. We got a DCNR grant of $100,000 to assess the regional resources and develop management strategies for the greenways and the parks and open space in the 4 regions. So again, the overall framework, there's basically 3 major elements to the study. There's the rural greenway analysis that we did and the stewardship strategies that we recommended. Then there's the Main Street greenways, which are 13 downtowns in the 4 regions. And we identified improvement opportunities for those. I'll go into that some more, obviously, as well. And then the stewardship side of it, maintaining and managing the greenways, the stewardship elements that the Natural Lands did, and then sort of the other education and land use controls that we can also implement as stewardship from the municipal level to manage those greenways in a better, more proactive way. So again, what is a greenway? And all throughout this study, in all the different elements, we tried to integrate education. It's not just about the study and identifying the greenways and recommendations, but really just educating people on why greenways are important. What value do they provide for your community? And how can we continue to enhance those resources by being better stewards of them? So we have a really, really broad definition of greenway that we use as sort of the centerpiece for this. It's really just an interconnected system of public and private lands that benefit from shared stewardship principles. And the highlighting of the public and private is important because we have a lot of public open space in the 4 regions, big parks, big conservation areas, a lot of preserved farmland. But the vast majority of the land is going to remain private. And if we're really going to make any significant effort or contribution to enhancing the environment, we have to get to those private landowners as well. They manage the majority of the land. And so we have to involve them in the process as well, using the public lands, particularly as maybe examples and case studies for where the private landowners can look on the right principles to use. So the importance of greenways, I'm going to go over these quickly: ecological, economic, social, and community. We did focus on delineating and managing greenways as part of this study. The open space plans, again, that the municipalities did in the 90s and the early 2000s, they did a really good job of identifying land for acquisition and for trail development. This was not that plan. This plan was not geared towards looking for properties for acquisition or looking for properties for trail development. There's a relationship. There's certainly a complementary factor in there, but we were getting at how private landowners should be managing their land. And so we wanted to distance ourselves from the idea of acquisition and trail development, that we weren't looking to buy your property. We weren't looking to put a trail across your property. We're looking to ways to educate you on the best way to manage your property while you still own it and do what you want with it. So it was a balance that we really had to initiate there. So again, the ecological benefits: conserve natural resources. Water resources are one of the most important, protecting floodplains, keeping them open to allow for the floodwaters without providing property damage. And then riparian buffers, which are important for water quality and making sure that we protect those potentially, preferably wooded areas along the streams that will enhance the water quality. So again, keeping these areas open and preserved and protected is what's important. And then the ecological benefits continue for the land side of it as well. Stream bank protection, terrestrial habitat, woodlands are the key here for all of that, for all the benefits for cooling, habitat, CO2 absorption, steep slopes, reducing erosion, which contributes to stream siltation. And then the diet-based geology, which is in several parts of the regions, running through all four of them at some point, is a real development constraint. It has high mineral content, unique habitat. Because of that mineral content, only certain plants grow within the diet-based soils, which is really unique. And of course, the natural wildlife borders that run along those primarily wooded diet-based ridges because they're so difficult to develop. Well, there's also the economic benefits. We've really taken care of that with our economic impact of protected open space report. We updated that, the return on the environment. Homes within a half mile of open space have a value of 11,300 more than homes that are further out. It increases the home equity and resale. It's also a boost to local businesses by increasing spending by those participating in local recreation. We have a lot of the communities along the Perkiomen Trail that have leveraged that trail and the 100,000 plus users of that per year to stop into their community and spend some of their money for lunch and for, in case of Green Lane, for some beer at the Perkiomen Brewing Company. At the Green Lane Brewing Company. Increased spending in greenways and trails connected to the main street area. So just increasing the ability to get from the trails to the main streets is also a key factor. And then reduce governmental costs. All of the communities in the four regions have an MS4 permit. And so we know in the red streams here, you can see are the ones that are impaired in the four regions. And so we want to improve the water quality. Better water quality reduces costs for water treatment in particular. And there's also additional costs as municipalities have impaired streams. They have to sort of implement a pollutant reduction plan for how to bring that stream back to health. And all of that, costs money and projects that municipalities have to take some of their attention in that area. And then increase quality of life from access to open space and recreation. When that comes into the social community benefits as well, having access to that open space provides increased opportunities for exercise, which increase overall health. And then there's the mental aspect, the relief of stress and mental health that that is improved when you have access to nature. And then the historical and cultural preservation, particularly in our downtowns, but in the rural areas as well. We want to retain that community character and sense of place. So again, lots of benefits of greenways from all different perspectives that we want to see preserved through the development of the rural resource greenways. So what we did here is a key part of the greenways was, and I'm kind of going to build it for you in a second, and how we put the greenways together. But the big part of this study was what we called the priority management areas. These are the private lands over 10 acres within the four regions. And what we wanted to do was identify the most important 50% of those properties and how they would fit into the greenway in an interconnected way. And so this will involve shared stewardship principles to help maintain them, shared amongst the private lands as well as the public lands. All properties are part of the system. And then again, understanding that this has to be implemented by private landowners of their own free will, the degree to which properties contribute to the greenway or not is up to those private landowners. But we're sure in the surveys that we've done that out of the 3,000 properties we looked at, there are at least several hundred that are very interested in taking a more proactive perspective on their property. They just need the help and the education to do it. So we're sort of that coalition of the willing. We're not going to be going out and forcing anybody to create meadows on their property or to remove invasives in their woodlands. But we are going to help those that want to take a more proactive way and educate the others as we're going forward. So again, the growing greener approach, and this was something DCNR and Natural Lands really developed in the 90s with Randall Arendt in particular. It's really a cluster type of development, conservation subdivision. You look at properties over 10 acres and you preserve at least 50% of that property and cluster the homes on the other 50%. In some municipalities, Upper Salford, it went as high as 60% when they wrote it. I think the model language shows up to 75% of the land could be preserved as well. It just depends on the housing mix that you'd like. But we use that as sort of our baseline for decision-making and what properties we looked at. So we started off with doing a natural resource analysis. We looked at all the preserved park, all the natural areas, the primary resources, floodplains, steep slopes, and wetlands. We did bring in the riparian buffers, both the 100-foot, which is most important for water quality, and the 300-foot, which is really about habitat corridors, and then all the forested areas. 3,000 parcels over 10 acres that we looked at, identifying the most important 50%. again, this was the bulk of the work that we did, at least in the time consuming part of it. This was a real iterative process. You had to go and start with one property, identify, looking at the resources on it, what the most important 50% of that property was. And then you would go to the next property and you would have to identify the 50% there. But they may not join up in a way that makes the most sense for a greenway. So you'd have to go back and adjust and tweak the first property, then go to the second property and adjust and tweak that one, and then go to the third property. So it was a process that was fairly time consuming. And again, we really developed a process for this that was as streamlined as it could be when we did it for Upper Salford. And again, we just were upscaling it to the 4 regions. So the first thing we did was look at the whole area, because it is a very diverse area in the types of landscapes that they have. So we did want to recognize what we called the landscape character areas, sort of the different characters. Some are farmland, some are woodlands, some are a little bit more on the edge of suburban development. And when we were identifying the key resources within each of these landscape character zones, we wanted to reflect it slightly different in each one. So the diabase, the woodlands are the most important. The Swamp Creek and some of the Green Lane Basin, where we have a lot of preserved farmland. Farmland was the important resource. And so when we did the analysis of resources within each of these landscape character zones, they had different criteria and different ratings for each of the resources that allowed us to be specific to those landscape character zones. So real quick, we'll take a closer look at the process. I won't spend too much time on this because again, it is pretty detailed, but this is again, an example of the diabase crescent kind of running through Upper Hanover, New Hanover, Douglas, Upper Frederick, Marlborough, and into Salford. So we zoom in and we build the Greenway. We started with all of the preserved parks, both county, local, state, and looked at those as sort of providing the skeleton of the Greenway system. We brought in the conservation lands. These are all lands that are privately preserved and conserved, permanently protected. We also looked at the farmlands that were preserved, because again, this isn't about public access. So even though those private farms are, we only bought the development rights, they're still owned in fee simple by the owner. This is not about access to those, or it's about basically some shared development and management principles for those. The steep slopes, floodplains, and wetlands. And then we looked at the properties over 10 acres, and those are in yellow. And then we put on top of that the natural resource analysis. And basically the darker gray areas provided the most convergence of high importance resources, which then when we were doing that analysis for each property, you would try and protect the darkest gray areas to the greatest extent possible. So we just zoom in and you can see how that looks here with the 10-acre properties. And you can see underneath through the yellow sort of how the natural resources work out. And then we would do the 50% delineation. When you look at it by itself, the priority areas kind of look a little disconnected. They cross the properties themselves, but they don't always connect to everything else. That gets filled in as we build the Greenway with the buffers and the woodlands. So that's just with the priority management areas. Back to the big picture, we added in the riparian buffers, 100 foot, 300 feet, and then we added in the woodlands. And that gets us the Greenway system that we want to see protected to the greatest extent possible. And we do have different management and stewardship strategies for each. We developed 3 different zones of protection. So that's what the Greenway looks kind of zoomed in on this portion of the county in Marlborough Township. And then you see how the properties are affected afterwards. So in a real microcosm, I guess, is these are 4, 5, 6, 7, 4 properties that are in Upper Salford Township. And you can see how they would get developed under this system if they were using a conservation subdivision. So the dark green is the portion of the property that gets preserved, and the lighter section is what gets developed. I will say this is important to know too, is when we did this analysis, we didn't just do it from 100% from the resource perspective. That was a big part of it. This is about preserving resources, but we couldn't make it something that was unreasonable. We had to recognize that if these properties were actually going to get developed as conservation subdivisions, the open land, the land to be developed, had to make as much sense as the land being preserved and protected. So we wanted to make sure that there was possibilities for the developed portion of properties to also be linked together, so that you could get some road connections and get some interconnectivity between those properties. And we didn't want to necessarily push everything to the back of the property either, where there would have to be a developer would have to do a long access road that wouldn't have a single home on it, right? That's going to be an expense. That's going to be something that they're going to complain about. And maybe in some of these communities, they might have an option not to do the conservation subdivision. So we wanted to make it reasonable and economic for the developer as much as a benefit for the resource and greenway protection. So that was the sort of how it would look if each of these properties got developed. And that's kind of where it started for Upper Salford. After they adopted and it's mandatory cluster in Upper Salford, they started thinking about it as well. These properties aren't going to develop overnight. They're probably going to develop over the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years, maybe in Upper Salford. And at the end of the day, if each of those properties we get 50% protected and it's done property by property over the next 25 years, we could end up with a patchwork of open space that doesn't really make sense. So how can we make sure that as properties get developed, they're interconnected? And that's where this process was really born from. So this is just the Greenway system on the larger scale of the 4 regions. And you can see in the dark gray in the background, those are the developed designated growth areas for each of the regions as well. So we did develop stewardship strategies for each of these. So what we call the preservation zone, the land that's essentially already protected, public parks, conservation lands, ag lands, and the primary resources. And then the management zone, which is really the buffer areas and those priority management areas, those 10-acre properties. And then the conservation zone, which is really taking that bigger picture look, more for a habitat perspective, about 300-foot riparian buffers, and then the woodlands and canopy conservation. And then for each of them, for the preservation zone, we had recommendations for farmland, encouraging them to implement their conservation plans, working with NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, they have a number of programs which will pay people to protect riparian areas, woodlands, and just build on those opportunities for those. A big part of the study, which we'll get into in the Main Street Greenways, was economic development. That's something that came out of the Perk Up plan that was done in the early 2000s for the Upper Perk region. And they wanted to really leverage nature tourism as a way to provide economic development to the boroughs in the community, but also to leverage all of their natural resources, Green Lane Park, Mill Hill, Camelot Park in Upper Hanover. And so that economic development perspective also is extended to the agricultural lands. We want to make sure that all of the land that we have preserved continues to be viable for farming. And so we can build on that by creating farmers markets, farm to table restaurants, partnership with the microbreweries. And then as part of that ag tourism, farm tourism, Merry Meat Farms kind of situations can be great ways to continue the viability of those farms. And then the conservation lands, working with those conservation organizations on site master planning and making sure that they're managing the lands as best as possible. Floodplain to steep slopes of wetlands. This is really about ordinances and making sure that the communities have the latest ordinances, most up to date, and are implementing them. But then also from the private landowner side is making sure they understand the value of those resources and how they can best manage them and protect them. Buffers and priority management area, again, buffer regulations, cluster and conservation subdivision ordinances. Those are the key aspects for municipal implementation of this. And then there's the landowner education. And this is something we're starting to really work on in Upper Perk and Central Perk right now, and reaching out and working with our watershed conservation groups and some of the private landowners that have education in tree tending and watershed stewardship. And basically just educating those property owners, newsletters, flyers, workshops, reaching out and providing assistance, providing volunteers. Perk Human Watershed Conservancy can provide volunteers if there's a property that wants to enhance the value of their woodlands and have the invasives removed. They can go in and help with that. We've had some conversations with Ryan Belts, their executive director, in how we can enhance those relationships and do some capacity building, not only for them, but for the region as well, to get more residents trained on how to do these things, do parks, friends groups to help with the municipal management of their properties. So there's a lot of capacity building, a lot of education and private interests that need to be developed. And I think there's a real good energy for that right now, which was, again, one of the underlying goals of this was to really increase and expand the landowner ethic. To how can I be a better steward of my property and make sure that it's contributing to the bigger picture and to the natural habitat. And I think that has some resonance with this group out here. And a lot of the residents is that we are seeing some changes from, maybe just complete property rights to, well, I have my property rights, but I also want to make sure my land is contributing to the natural resources and to the water quality of the rest of the region. And then the last zone, the conservation zone, which is really sort of that bigger picture, 300-foot buffers, forest patches, can be protected through ordinances, but it's going to come back to that landowner education, that landowner ethic, and then providing them with the resources. They might have the interest and the desire, but if they don't know what to do, don't have the resources to do it, it's not going to do any good. So that's the goal, that capacity building, is to make sure that we're building the volunteer network with the skills to help private landowners do what they want to do anyway. So that's the rural resource greens. That's 1/3. We're 1/3 through. That's the resource part of the study. When I talked about the economic development part, though, and we had 26 communities focusing on rural resource preservation, we did kind of decide, well, at some point we want to build on this economic development aspect a little bit more. Plus, we have all the boroughs and towns, that aren't going to really benefit from the rural resource analysis. What can we bring to them as part of this study that'll really keep them engaged and involved? So we looked at Main Street greenways. Again, this is the economic development component of how to take that bigger picture of nature tourism and bring businesses back to the towns. Well, how can the towns be best positioned to accept that new visitor and make sure that they can get around safely in a nice environment, and again, hopefully build the economic value of that downtown. So we basically looked at all the boroughs, and then we asked any other villages in those communities, do you want us to look at your community as well? And Gilbertsville, Sumneytown, and Harleysville agreed to and asked us to also study them as well. So with the 10 boroughs and the three villages. And then Stewardship was the third, which we'll get to in a second. So again, the Main Street greenways, we wanted to complement the rural resource areas through nature tourism. This was a little different perspective. What we did here was we essentially took an interdisciplinary team, community planners, transportation planners, our landscape architects, our environmental planners, and we did a one-day site visit to each of the communities. A lot of prep work went into that, a lot of mapping. We also started the day off with a meeting with each of the municipalities, trying to understand what their goals and interests were. Any pet projects or wish list projects that they had that were just in their head, we wanted to take this opportunity to actually get them written down somewhere and memorialized in a study. And so we went out full day, literally started in the morning, found a place to eat lunch, always within that downtown we were looking at, and then wrap it up in the afternoon. 3 primary goals: walkability, green, and sustainable. Looks like we're getting cut off there at the bottom a little bit. So again, walkability was just making sure that people can safely walk along the main street as well as to the main street from their neighborhoods or from the adjacent greenway. And then also looking at safety, making sure we reduce the conflicts for the pedestrian and the vehicles in particular, but also any other safety issues. Just make sure it's a safe, comfortable walk. And then we wanted to do green, incorporate elements of the natural environment, native landscaping through opportunities for greenways, gateways, plazas, other physical improvements, and then just make sure that it's a vegetated streetscape, making sure that the parking lots are as vegetated and green as possible, and just that the public spaces are planted up in ways that are sustainable. And then going back to the stormwater, again, going back to the MS4 permits, we always wanted to keep an eye on how communities could score points essentially for their MS4 by implementing some green stormwater infrastructure. So we wanted to identify potential opportunities for that, ways that we can continue to use native vegetation, and then incorporate the standards, again, looking at the cultural and historic aspect of the communities, to do this in a way that is going to enhance and leverage that unique character of each of the villages. So recommendations, again, you can imagine sidewalk missing, adding crosswalks, repainting crosswalks, adding bump outs to reduce the crossing distance, which can also be opportunities for stormwater VMPs, street trees, streetscape improvements. This is an example of Red Hill, where their sidewalks aren't wide enough to do in the right of way or in the sidewalk tree pits. So we identified where you have the intersections, they have sort of the turn protected a little bit, where you can't do on-street parking. And so we thought those were great opportunities to put in these bump outs essentially, which will help slow the traffic at the crossings, reduce the distance, but also are opportunities for greening. And they are far enough away from the corners that the fire trucks can still make their turns. So a couple more specific examples from these studies that I'll pull out. This is one, we worked with DVRPC. They had an opportunity to help us visualize some of the recommendations. This is in Harleysville. Opportunity here, you have sort of a really wide opening here to the driveway that, just again, increases the conflict points for pedestrians and vehicles. We have the inlet right there, which is an opportunity for green stormwater infrastructure. And just an example of one thing, to basically provide some kind of infiltration area prior to the storm basin, reduces the curb cut and just increases the pedestrian safety, and also it creates the stormwater BMP.
Where did the money come for that?
So this wasn't done. This was just a visualization of one of the recommendations. But we have had a number of projects, and this would be one of them if they were interested, that have gotten 2040 grants. So
Great for this.
Yeah.
That's where I was leaving. I mean, so. Okay,
Yep,
good,
yep.
good.
Another example, this is back to Red Hill. This is sort of those hatched out areas I was talking about at the intersections. So this is just another picture of the DVRPC's example of how that could be done. Again, bumping out, reducing the crossing distance, but then also being able to add some green to that streetscape. So a couple other examples from the specific Greenway studies, the Gilbertsville Main Street. One of the things there, and if you've seen these presentations, this is probably my favorite. I don't know why, but it is. So they have Patriot Buick down there, and car dealerships are notorious for having horrible street frontages. I get it, right? They don't want trees. They don't want something that's going to limbs and sap and leaves falling on the cars. I get it. I'm not talking about that. But doing the one little plant there or absolutely nothing here. Well, Patriot, they did it. They had the Belgian block. They had a little planting area where they put roses. They had a little fence. It's beautiful. I mean, it hides the parking lot. It hides the wheels of the cars. It just makes the whole streetscape environment 100 times better. And so really we want to use this as a reference for showing other car dealerships it can be done, right? This is something that's not difficult to do. It's not going to reduce your business.
Long frontages.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
long street frontages.
In our Main Street area.
Could be impactful.
So again, I thought it was a really good example. The goal is to actually go meet with Patriot Buick and get a sense of, what initiated this and also what the yearly costs are for them to maintain.
Because it's a maintenance of these, for these groups. And what I was going to ask the question at the end, but I have some ideas how we might consider that.
Great.
And what would they say just to another dealership who says, I want people to see my cars? I mean, that's why they want anything. They want to see what the inventory looks like.
Yep. And again,
I like that car. I'm gonna pull in, ask.
well, I mean, I you can see the cars here, I think just as well as you can here. But you're not seeing the parking lot, you're not seeing the wheels perhaps, but you can see that they have available inventory. You can get a look at the car. And the fact that this isn't something they did 1 year and we caught it in a picture. They do it year after year. So my guess is if it was hurting their business in any way, it would have ended years ago.
Yeah.
I'd like to have more of a conversation with them in particular. This is another thing that came out in every Main Street we walked, we saw missing trees. And you can see lots of people do different things with the old tree stumps. They'll put a flower on it. It may be difficult to see here, but you can see there's some tree stumps here. The main streets are missing a lot of trees on the front lawns, not just sort of in the plantings or in the street trees. And I get it, over time, they probably did have their life expectancy for those trees, but they're not being replaced. So we got to find ways to work with these private landowners to get new trees. And that's one of the things they're looking at in Upper Kirk right now. They have 2 people that are trained as tree tenders through Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. They're trying to get a third. And once you get a third, you're eligible for tree grants. So they want to be able to basically do a tree in every yard program that anybody that wants a tree can get it. And then the tree tenders will make sure that for the first 3 years, it gets watered and maintained. And hopefully over time, we can get the canopy back to these Main Street areas, as well as beautification of the homes, right? It'll reduce their cooling and heating costs when it finally becomes a shade tree for the home. Lots of benefits to trees. And we want to find ways to rebuild that canopy in the downtowns. Just an example, in Pottstown, they have right in front of the Hill School, this gravel sort of verge area. Why don't they plant that? And while they're at it, get rid of all these Bradford pears and put in a better tree for that area. In Collegeville, they wanted to look at, they have a part of their downtown, which is zoned for sort of residential, commercial, and to enhance the lower side of the street, the left, the non-yellow side, that's commercial, that's sort of Main Street commercial. And looking at, this is one of those things that was one of those sort of wish lists for them that over the years, they thought we should do this, we should look at this. Well, this put it into a plan that hopefully they would be able to remember and reference. And actually Naomi Krim just finished up a draft that rewrites this area for a Main Street Commercial District. So this is something that has been implemented, has happened. Again, I want to take full credit for it because this is something that they knew eventually had to be done, but I think again, putting it in a study, making sure that they were reminded of it, and maybe some of the council people that weren't aware of this recommendation, got up to speed on why it was important. Another one that was done in Collegeville was improve that main intersection at Ursinus College. And so that's been done. Again, that was another sort of wish list project that finally came to fruition with help of PennDOT. In Trapp, they have a great entrance to their park here off of Main Street, and right across the street from that is Borough Hall. So we recommended that they actually look at doing some kind of crosswalk, mid-block crossing to make people that are at the Borough Hall and the new park they're putting in there be able to access the existing park. This is a good example too, that once we did all these 13 studies and we identified all the recommendations, we brought in PennDOT to go through all of the recommendations that we made and said, because a lot of these roads are state roads, Route 29, Route 663, Ridge Pike through to Collegeville. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't making recommendations that would get an immediate no from PennDOT through their highway occupancy permit to do a mid-block crossing here or to do a bump out. So they actually looked at it, we pulled up Street View and they were looking at the site distances because they have certain criteria to identify a mid-block crossing. And anything they didn't approve, we didn't put in the studies. Because again, we wanted to make sure that these were realistic and something that could be implemented. So that was a real benefit to have PennDOT as part of that process. Repaint the crosswalks here. That's something we found out a lot too. And it's always a question of who's responsible, it's costs money to do it. So we recognize those limiting factors, but a lot of crosswalks are faded out and don't provide the same safety level or visibility. And so we need to get those improved and maintained. Also, you can see the sidewalks out front just end. So you can't get into the shopping center. So if the shopping center gets redeveloped, if they come in with an addition, they should be required to build that sidewalk all the way into the development.
Eric, in Collegeville, they had PennDOT put up like fake bricks on the crosswalk, which seem after a year or two to just come up with that like a not a recommended thing anymore.
We've tried so many different things over the years. So we've tried the different types of materials. We've tried the appliques. They all have different levels of success. They all need to be maintained, which is sort of the bigger issue, and cost. And so that's something I think we're always struggling with is what's the best thing to use. I think in general, a lot of people just think the kind of the continental white sliced crosswalks are the most visible and probably the cheapest to maintain. It just depends on sort of that character that you want to create in that sense of place. And some of the downtowns, it might make more sense to do something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing or decorative. But there is going to be a cost and maintenance component to that.
And Trapp and Collegeville are outside the study area that you were talking about, right? This is just.
No, they're part of the central perf region, okay. Both of them. Yep. Schwanksville, again, the same thing. They have the downtown, which is starting to see some new businesses and some new activity, which is really exciting. But it's a little dreary. They probably need to identify some streetscape and greening to do. About the same time as this, maybe a year or two after, they actually did a streetscape design guideline plan. And so for new development, they do identify ways for them to integrate greening into that development. Sumneytown, this has been an issue. Speeding is a major issue and concern for Marlboro through Sumneytown. Also, the walkability of this area is limited because of the parking situation. A lot of these homes don't have any other access to parking. So they essentially park in the right of way and it limits the pedestrian connectivity here. And so it's something that PennDOT's aware of and that Marlboro has been looking at is how do we have to address the issue of the parking before we can address the issue of the pedestrian safety. And so there are some opportunities for looking for some shared parking for properties. If there's ways to bring in some rear access off of Upper Ridge Road, off of Garyville Pike, then that would be another option as well. And East Greenville. So right here to the left is what's now the 4th, 5th grade center. Used to be the middle school. And you have basically this underpass and you have this kind of the sidewalk ending here. And then you walk in the street through the underpass to the sidewalk on the other side. So we did a photo rendering and made the recommendation that much like you've seen maybe some bridges in Lower Merion, right in Ardmore, it's just there's actually a walking path, on the side. This is a 1-lane bridge anyway, and there's plenty of space to add the sidewalk and still make it a 1-lane through. And so for the safety of the residents and for the kids that are walking to the school or to the parks and playgrounds there at the school, this was a recommendation as well, which again would be something that'd be fundable under the 2040. And that's something that has happened. We have had, I think of at least there's a Collegeville 3rd Street connection from Main Street down to their Memorial Park, which a sidewalk was added to. Souderton, I'm not sure the project got built, but it got granted to do some stormwater improvements to their main parking lot. I think they got caught in the cost overruns that occurred with the sort of the supply chain issues. But in any case, these are things that have been implemented over the years through the Main Street greenways. Okay, I'll get a drink of water and I will let Kelsey talk about the stewardship aspect of the study. Again, I'll just highlight quickly. I think she mentioned that we did assessments for 1,500 acres of municipal parks, 38 parks. Each municipality got at least 2 parks. Some got 3 that were studied as part of this. And then we also looked at 475 acres of Green Lane. And the idea for this is to provide specific recommendations for the parks that were studied. But most of those recommendations they're facing the same issues municipalities are in all of their parks. So these recommendations are transferable to not just the ones that are identified, but to all their other parks. And in many cases to the private landowners that are near those parks as well.
Eric, it's important for people to understand that this didn't happen in 2 years.
No, it did not.
I mean, this was when
Big effort.
when I was young.
That long ago?
Yeah, I mean, 4 years. Yeah. But I think was it 2010, 2012?
So it's not that long, but.
But
Well, I mean, all of the groundwork has been laid for the last probably 20 years in reality. The study itself, we did the kickoff meeting in 2015. And Rob Wonderling came and gave a keynote address for that.
It's been building. I mean, it's clear that it's been building to this level of effort.
And all the work
And
is.
COVID, we lost a couple planners along the way. So there were some lows, but also just, it's a lot of work and bringing the municipalities along the whole way was, we wouldn't want to do it too fast.
It's a story of regional planning. This is what is the outcome of having people build trust and relationships for 20 years. And also Eric and his team and John Cover before, who really had the patience of saints to do this work. And people will forget your names, but they will be enjoying the results of this for decades.
And John in particular, he got them all started. And then, we got them over the hump in a few of them. And we had to change perspectives along the way, but that's all about the give and take. And I think why they have been so successful is that everybody's gotten something out of it. So, Kelsey?
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Kelsey Boyd and I'm with Natural Lands. I'm their Stewardship Planning Program Manager. For anyone not familiar with Natural Lands, we're an environmental nonprofit based Southeastern PA, Southern New Jersey, and we focus on caring for nature, saving open space, and connecting people to the outdoors. So this really fits within our wheelhouse, this project, and Montgomery County is one of our more core areas. And we do all of Southeastern PA, but we focus in Montgomery, Chester, kind of those more central counties really are where we focus most of our time and efforts in. So we're very excited to be part of this project. Most of our work was from 2015 to 2018. So just keep that in mind as I talk through, because there have been, new issues like Emerald Ash Borer that came up after that you may not see through the recommendations, but hopefully this kind of project does set the municipalities up to keep going forward and steering their land with anything new that comes up. But so we focused on 3 main pieces for the stewardship study. We looked at individual site assessments for municipal parks and open spaces. We focused on a complementary stewardship guide, and then a Green Lane stewardship plan, which was really a standalone piece of this. For the site assessments, what we wanted to do was look at individual parks and open spaces within the municipalities. As Eric said, every municipality got at least 1 park assessed. Usually some of them had multiple parks. And you can see they're stretched throughout the 4 planning regions. The municipalities identified what parks they would like to see, but we did encourage that they selected a range of types of properties. So lots of active, parks with a lot of active recreation, some that had no public access to the formalized public access, forests, riparian areas, meadows, wetlands, so that it covered a whole diversity of types of parks and open spaces that we're seeing in these municipalities, and that could apply to the wider county as well. So across the 3 years, we did assessments for each of these properties and then came up with stewardship reports for each of them that gave an overview of what's currently there and then recommendations for how to care for it over time. The first step in doing those site assessments after, of course, the initial contacts with the municipalities was to go out and walk each of these properties on the ground to see what was really there, what were the current conditions, what vegetation did they have, what issues were they facing, and what opportunities were presented through each of these different properties. We did invite municipal staff and supervisors to come out with us. Some of them did take us up on that offer and walk the property with us, which was great because not only could they share their knowledge with us of what they've seen over time, what the use is, what they hope to see for these properties. But it was really great to get that one-on-one connection and encourage a stewardship ethic with them, show them what was really great about the property, show them what could be improved to kind of keep, they are excited about their open space in parkland, but to really get them excited about the natural resources on site too. So
Kelsey, these are all municipally owned or publicly owned sites?
they are publicly owned, sorry, yes. So we focused on public sites with the intention that everything that we recommended for the public sites were things that could be transferable and utilized for private properties. But so we looked at what vegetation communities were there, what, forests, meadows, what the dominant plant species were to just get that initial inventory of what the baseline conditions are. We looked at habitat quality and diversity. We even looked at things like hazards and nuisances like hazard trees and what kind of impact that has to both natural resources and recreation of the site. And then how the recreation also tied towards the natural resources because they are directly interconnected. So we were able to see really a multitude of different types of properties, starting with, mature forests to wetlands, meadows, and even like rain gardens were included as part of this. So we saw a lot of great examples of healthy communities, as you can see in the pictures. We did also come across a lot of stewardship issues. This was really the start and then the height of the spotted lanternfly during this study. So that was highlighted a lot in this report. The bottom left picture, it's hard to see with this lighting, but that's all invasive vines that have grown up trees. So invasive plants were really a highlight for this project. And as I mentioned, even hazard trees were covered, noting their, potential ecological significance for habitat, but also the danger they can pose to visitors, structures nearby kind of idea. So after getting that on the ground information and any information that municipalities want to share with us, because in addition to doing on the ground site visits with them, some instead wanted to, meet first with us before we went on the property. So we'd sit down with their staff and chat over the property before we went out. So there was kind of a range of involvement from the municipalities. But from there, we put together the actual stewardship assessments, which were concise reports for each property. The next few slides just shows excerpts from one of those reports. We started with an introduction to the property, a little bit of background about how it was being used, what the historic use was. We pulled historical aerials to see kind of how the property has evolved over time, because that informs us about kind of where some really nice areas might be of the property. We called out notable features and notable stewardship issues right away. So they're, kind of right there for, primary reading for anyone going through these. We then divided the property up by plant communities. If it was an upland forest or riparian forest, wet meadow, terrestrial meadow, so that when we then went into recommendations, we can easily reference throughout the property where recommendations applied to. So this is really the core piece, though, of each of the assessments. We created a recommendations table that prioritized recommendations for the entire property. So as you go across the list, you can see the priority level. You can see what kind of category or recommendations referred to. So it could be deer management, invasive plant control. Emerald ash borer was just starting to come around during this time. We hadn't seen the mass die-offs yet. Where within the property we classified them as management units, but where within the property they apply to, and then the recommendations. So things like implementing a deer management program, surveying and posting boundaries, monitoring for spotted lanternfly and emerald ash borer, then when these activities would be appropriate, and then who could implement them. Were they projects that were appropriate for municipal staff? Are they something that maybe would be great to get a contractor for, or is it something that volunteers could help them with? So this was really kind of the guidelines for how to take care of the property, hopefully giving them all the essentials. They could almost use it as a checklist as they went through, and something that any of their volunteers or public works staff could quickly consult and see what, could be going on at the property. And each of the reports did include a map with those different plant communities labeled as management units, GPS points taken in the field for significant features or issues. So like this one, we found Virginia bluebells, which was, it's a spring ephemeral. It's something that's typically browsed by deer very quickly. So to find them on a property is really great to see. It's important to highlight. It's a really nice features that we, like to call out so that they can, again, see what the really great parts of their natural features are. In addition to, you have a very large stand of ailanthus right here, tree of heaven. You want to address that. So kind of balancing both the good features and some of the issues along the way. So the hope was that for each, for each park they have an assessment, they have this kind of quick guide. But then the next piece that we did for this project was the very comprehensive stewardship guide, which was the complement to the assessments. The assessments are the quick individualized reference with that almost checklist. But the stewardship guide is the piece that really goes into why are these issues and opportunities that we called out in the assessments important? Why are riparian buffers important? And then a more in-depth explanation of any of the recommendations of how to care for these features, any of these issues. And the idea really was that not only would it be appropriate for these properties, but that it could be appropriate for other public properties or other private lands, because what we saw across these 38 properties, most of those issues and opportunities are readily transferable to other properties. And we really worked hard to make sure that the guide was easy to go through. So if you have a forest and you want to know how to manage it, you can hopefully quickly navigate yourself through the guide to look at, okay, how do you manage a forest? What are the major concerns? Deer, invasive plants, okay. And then go through there and kind of see how that lines up with your other properties. We did have 4 main sections. The first is how to use the assessments, kind of a brief guide of what was included with them, how to use the assessments and how it relates to the guide. The bulk of it was the issues and opportunities with the more in-depth explanation, kind of some next steps you might want to think about when managing your land, and then resources. What kinds of grants are available out there? Even something like what native plant nurseries are available, because we really encourage native plants, but they're not always the most readily available to find from your standard supplier. So the idea was that this guide could then help everyone implement, but you don't need to carry around your big guide to know what you need to do on your individual properties. It's kind of your reference for it. And then the last piece was the Green Lane Stewardship Plan. And this was meant to be a more comprehensive plan, a more example of what we typically do for our stewardship plans, and that it is more of a standalone document. You don't need the stewardship guide. It can help, but this kind of is more self-contained. So we looked at 475 acres over 4 separate areas within the park. So we didn't get a chance to assess the full park just because of the scope of work. But we did look and work with the county to pick 4 areas that were representative of different types of vegetation and different types of uses. So we had one very large meadow area. We had some upland forests. We had riparian buffers. We even looked at, where people are getting access to the water and how does that affect natural resources. So again, the idea is that you get the range of uses and plant communities, it's transferable to the rest of the park then. So similar to the site assessments, we did actually do site visits for this property. And for this one, we did multiple site assessments. We did, connect with the park staff, invite them out for site visits. They did take us up on that some, which was great. Again, because they are the on-the-ground experts. We need their input on what they've seen over time, what they know their issues are, where they hope to go with the park. And then we fill in with our, knowledge and what we see on the ground as well. So from that assessment, we then came up with recommendations. And these are just 4 examples of kind of the topics that we looked into. So forest sustainability, meadows, public use, kind of erosion were 4 topics. And And then again, we gave specific recommendations for how to manage and care for these areas. And then within this document plan, which was a little different from the assessments, is all that information about why these issues and opportunities are important, and how to care for them more in depth. So they still got the same priorities table, but all that extra, more detailed information was self-contained in this report. So across both Green Lane and all the site assessments, we hit the highlights of common issues that we saw across, which were really invasive plants and deer, which I'm sure is not really a surprise to anybody here. As I said, spotted lanternfly was also kind of the big issue there, but we saw plenty of examples of healthy habitat, healthy plant communities, opportunities, for encouraging public use of these sites in a positive way. We were seeing, great connections between ecological resources and recreation. So there was a lot of positive things that we saw throughout this, and a lot of, great resources throughout the sites. We had some very positive outcomes from this. I think one of the greatest outcomes was the stewardship plan, because it is so readily transferable to other properties. It can be used by public land managers, it can be used by private land managers. So it's a great resource to be able to have. We were able to, as I mentioned, engage with municipal staff and officials. So hopefully, talking up what the positives are, showing why you need to care for land. It's not just we have it, we protected it, it can sit there now. Why is having a stewardship ethic important, and engaging them on that level? We were able to get a more comprehensive view of the needs across municipalities. So not just looking at each park individually, but getting a sense of overall what was going on. My next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then throughout the 3 years that we were working on this, we did try and continuously improve our planning products over time, so that we really addressed what the municipal needs were and kind of help them get the best product that they could implement. So we saw 3 common needs that jumped out across municipalities, and I'm guessing this will not be a surprise to really anyone here, but capacity of municipal staff was usually an issue. I mean, they have a lot of land they need to take care of. They have a lot of different types of land and types of tasks they need to take on. So just, people hours and also skills base are, something that could be improved. The resources that they had to manage it could also be improved. And then finally, having a solid volunteer base that they could rely on and depend on was also lacking in a lot of communities, and could be very beneficial. The volunteers are great with helping on projects that need, a lot of long-term maintenance and also a lot of hands all at once. So there's great opportunities for volunteer engagement. And we did see some potential for future opportunities working with the county as this kind of as a starting point to go forward. So we didn't include private landowners for this, but as Eric mentioned, they identified a lot of private landowners in the greenways that this type of stewardship could be applicable for. There's potential for continued stewardship outreach to municipalities, and then potential to develop volunteer programs either at an individual park level, municipal level, or even, kind of more beyond that. So, we see it as a starting point. Hopefully it's a really good basis for municipalities to improve and increase their stewardship work, but there's plenty to do from here as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Eric, but here's my contact information. If you think of any questions after today, feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much. So just one last slide, just sort of talking about the implementation. And again, taking so many years to kind of fully complete, we didn't wait until it was done to actually start any of the implementation. Again, many of the Main Street Greenway opportunities were developed into 2040 grants. We did a Main Street Greenway Planning Smarter event held in Lansdale to kind of share with communities what our audit process was and how they can replicate it in their communities. I do know the Parks and Recreation Committees and Public Works Departments have utilized the stewardship assessments, particularly when it comes to the hazard trees and the hazards and nuisances identified, but also stream bank stabilization and the erosion issues in particular. We're also going to be basically taking all these recommendations and putting them into each of the comprehensive plans as they get rewritten. We're finishing up the draft of the Upper Perk plan right now. And so those recommendations are in there. Basically, just to take this report, simplify it down a little bit and put it into the comprehensive plans, again, to memorialize and make sure it doesn't get lost and keeps kind of being in the forefront of their minds. We're getting started on the Central Perk and the Indian Valley comprehensive plans right now. They'll be done over the next 18 months. We're going to be putting the recommendations into those. Probably by the end of the year, Pottstown will get started as well. And so we'll be putting it into all those plans. But stewardship education is the big thing we want to focus on, I think, moving forward. We're developing in slightly different ways in each of the regions, but I think that'll be good because they can serve as case studies for each other, as opposed to everybody taking one perspective or one approach. And so again, the volunteer network and building capacity is key. What's the bullet you can't see on this slide for whatever reason is we're going to be doing a Planning Smarter event in the fall this year, focusing on municipal stewardship and capacity building. And so that's the big thing is we want to provide the training necessary to make sure we have the volunteers that are able to do a lot of this work or educate landowners as well on how they can do the work themselves. And that's really key. Again, we want to kind of build that ethic. We want people who think about how can I be stewards of my talents, my resources, but also good stewards of the land that I own and make sure that it is being, and developed and managed in a way that's going to contribute to the greater resources. So that's it. And the last thing I want to make sure is there wasn't any implication that this is my study or that I did this all. Everybody in the office was involved to some degree. The community planners, 10 of the 13 communities we had contracts with, the community planner for that wrote the Main Street Greenway chapter. They divvied up the other ones that didn't. They did all the mapping. We had transportation, design planners, the environmental planners came out on those audits with us, reviewed chapters. Anastasia did the final publication, Patience of a Saint to deal with meat as I tried to pull the resources together for 4 different publications. So anyway, team effort on that. I'm just the face of it and get to take that part of the credit, but it was a total agency-wide effort.
Any questions?
Mapping, GIS, integral to the whole thing. I must didn't feel it needed to be mentioned. Clearly not,
Right. Yeah, I think this is fantastic, and as Dulce mentioned, this is planning, no? And this has been for a long time. I have a question, it might be related or not. A later concern has been the most cities or downtowns during the summer hours have high temperatures. And for example, in the case of Secate, we have been participating with PHS with planting trees, and we have been working on the property, but I am afraid that municipalities has not been really friendly with the planting of trees because the maintenance that require. At least that has been, for example, the case here in Norristown. However, the need to reduce the heat in the cities and in the downtowns is necessary for many reasons. Health reasons and the environment, etc., the global warming, etc. Is all this planning also considering including in these greenways, the downtowns of all these municipalities?
Yep. So again, that was the goal of the Main Street Greenways was to look at and Pottstown was one of them in this region, in the Pottstown region, and identifying again the greening aspects for how they could improve. And it's not only certainly the heat island effect. We saw that in John Lesher's presentations about how the lack of trees increases the heat island effect and the costs associated with that. But from the aesthetic perspective and from the going and feeling comfortable in a place, we know that downtowns that have trees, people spend longer time there and they spend more money there. So there's all those benefits, but we want to find ways to get more trees down there. And we have communities, I think I mentioned, like Red Hill.
Here in Norristown too.
Yes, yeah, oh yeah. So that'll be, I think that's what's going to come out of, a piece of it will come out of what we're going to do in our fall planning smarter, because that's not going to be an event just for the 4 regions. That's where we want to take the lessons learned and the recommendations from the 4 regions and give them to the whole county, to the Abingdons, to the Norristowns, to the Lansdales, to everybody, and expand that information. Because it goes beyond, like I say, I think the maintenance is always the issue. And there's different ways around that. Pottstown works with the bus service to help maintain their vegetation downtown. We have East Greenville, who's done a great job maintaining the street trees in their own community. They also have a volunteer network up there. The Upper Perk Garden Club helps do maintenance. And so, again, it all comes back to that capacity. So if Norristown needs help building their internal capacity, or if they can develop some volunteer networks by training some block by block, by neighborhood, that want to take some ownership of their own streetscape. But they need the training, they need the resources to be able to do that. And then working with PHS to actually get the trees, put in there in the first place. So I think it all comes back to that capacity building, because not every municipality has that internal capacity. And even if they might have the resources, they still need the training and the understanding of what to do. But then there's some that also budgets are tight. They don't have the resources. How can they leverage volunteer networks? How can they leverage, other experts to come and help them manage those areas better?
Then it is possible that those places that has less capacity be awarded with grants to build that capacity.
Yeah, I think that's certainly an aspect of it that we could look at, is what resources we could bring that would help them build that. But if we can do the training ourselves, if we can work with the Penn State Extension, which does the watershed stewards, we can build that network and provide people access to that training. Encourage, maybe give some grants or scholarships for people to take become a tree tender for their community, so that they can get the grants to plant trees in their neighborhood. So that's stuff we're all trying to better understand.
And the work that is done is necessarily with the municipality. It is including nonprofits. Are you open to include nonprofits?
Absolutely, particularly when we involve the volunteer side of it. That could be the source of those volunteers. Again, the Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy, which covers the whole 4 regions, is somehow, except for some of the direct drainage right to the Schuylkill, is all part of the Perkiomen watershed. And so working with them and their existing volunteer network, building on that, expanding on that, and getting them to sort of be the foundation. But that's going to change community by community, and what that nonprofit might be that will help start that volunteer network and build that capacity.
Eric, I have 2 questions. Number 1 was addressing this issue of capacity. Has there been any discussion, and I don't like to use the word authorities, because that always makes, but groups of people coming together in these regions for this maintenance, to share tools, to share personnel. So all the public works people are over, everybody has too much to do. So is there some way, has that been a discussion on how we can do that better as on a regional, maybe a co-op where you put certain money in and then you can buy time, or it gets prioritized? So
yeah, it's come out of the discussions. I think of the one most recently, Red Hill and East Greenville. They have the 2 people in the region that are tree tenders. And so they didn't even know they were both tree tenders until we were at a meeting, and the East Greenville rep just joined the Regional Planning Commission. And so they got talking about, how can we cooperate? How could we get a grant together to do a tree planting program in our communities? Oh, and by the way, if you need some specialized training within your public works, how about we send 1 each, or 1 from my community that will also do the work in your community? And I think
it's going to have to,
when it comes to that kind of sharing stuff, we've learned over the years that has to be organic and kind of grow from the ground up. We can't come in and go, you guys need to join and work together and dissolve this.
But supporting that,
But connecting them, making them aware of one another.
And then supporting it once they commit.
Because it doesn't happen and stay stuck. You can have the first date or 2 dates, and then, somebody moves, somebody changes, somebody has a baby, somebody retires. That stuff has to be, maintained. The other issue about trees, and I love when we put trees in Pottstown. Look how many 5,000 trees have gone in there. We have to be realistic about the right tree, the right place, making sure that they're put in and tended properly, and the whole issue of sidewalks. These trees, if you don't plan them properly and you don't have enough space, they lift sidewalks, and then you have, I've seen flexible sidewalks. I've seen times when people bevel the edges to deal with them. We have to figure out some of the solutions for these things. So once we get these trees and they get up and they're big and healthy and wonderful, we don't have people screaming to cut them down, which is what you get.
Yeah, it's kind of right next to each other. You have East Greenville and Pennsburg who have gone down different paths on this. They both did some grants back in the late 90s to put in street trees. East Greenville has worked really hard to try and understand right tree, right place. How can we improve the environment and get the best tree to grow? Also understanding that trees have lifespans, right? They aren't going to be there forever, and they have, you're going to need to do maintenance. And they've figured it out. They've continued to improve and get better at it year after year. Yeah, Pennsburg just got frustrated. They saw the basically what were just dead trees up and down their main street, and so they took them out. They're doing some other things. They've tried some planters. They're not. They're trying to do the right thing in other ways,
but as we know, they were not necessarily the right tree, and they were not planted.
Exactly. Yeah, and
you got money to do it. I mean, as the county, it's frustrating because we're giving them money to do it, and then we can't really control early on how they do it. The trees they put in, and
we were all on a learning curve, I think, back then, because we approved those grants and we looked at the plantings and we thought they were going to be successful. But again, we kept learning and we're updating the landscape ordinance now, is pointing to Barry, because he's the real advocate of the right tree, right place, particularly when it comes to the soil volume. That's where we failed the most, probably, is we didn't provide them the area to grow properly.
Right.
That didn't upend the sidewalks, that didn't end up in dead trees. And so we're integrating those recommendations into our model landscape ordinance, so that not only to put it in the local subdivision land development ordinances, but also to utilize as we're working with people to do these new plantings.
Well, you just have to live another 30 years working on greenways, because the trust that you've built with these communities, we're able to go through these phases and people stay in. They don't say, oh, I'm out of here. They stay in and learn. And that's, a great accolades to the county for the tenacity and the perseverance and the vision to keep doing it.
It's finding the commonalities, right? They're there. You just got to have enough discussion that they come to the surface, and then.
I'm curious with Kelsey has worked through so many different regions. Did you see this differently because of our long-term regional planning? Did it feel different in any way?
In some ways it was nice to have the follow-up after the site visit, to come to the regional planning commissions and present what we learned and really have them interested and engaged, because it gave us a whole nother point of contact into these municipalities. And I think if you can get the group buy-in of saying that this is important, I think that's even stronger than just municipalities who fluctuate over time, who their supervisors are, who is on their park staff. It kind of, I think, gives a stronger foundation to wanting to continue to steward the properties. And again, that other touch point that if, we didn't have great success engaging with every municipality when we were trying to go out and do site visits. They engaged enough to say, great, this date works, that's perfect, go out and get it and send us a report when you're done. There were a few of those. So then also having the regional planning context as well as another way to engage the communities. I think that is unique and really helpful to have another way to deliver the message and the product.
And just putting back on my old natural lands cap, it gives you vision. People see you in these communities and they know who to call, and they're comfortable calling for other types of involvement. And that's really what we need. Ongoing support from multiple, whether it's public entities or nonprofits, to keep encouraging people to stay involved in this community of conservation-minded people, and to feel that this is important for them personally and for the place in which they live.
And Natural Lands has a great product, basically the force of nature, which is something that they've been doing for a while and in training volunteers. And so that's going to be a case study for the regions as well to build on that.
Thank you very much.
So I have a couple of things.
Absolutely.
Number one, I love the logo.
Yeah, great. See you here.
So who's ever did the logo, I love the logo, and all the mapping that's associated with this is really terrific. So that's great. When my wife and I were in Florida, we went to this little park. Had a big sign about the mental health benefits of open space.
Signage.
Right. So I took a photograph of it. I'll send it to you guys.
Yeah.
It was really pretty powerful, because I think a lot of times when people are in crisis, they seek out quiet places to think through what's going on in their lives. And this signage, which had like a QR code, I guess, to mental health advocates and that kind of thing, I think that would be really important to consider on different spaces that we have throughout the county. I'd also like to give a plug for the Park Union Watershed Conservancy. We run the largest single day volunteer cleanup in the state. That's something in the whole state. We've done that. We're also up in Green Lane, which I know is one of your focus. We have this pontoon boat that goes out with kids. We've talked about that before. But what I will also say is we're getting one of those metal containers and we're going to make that into a STEM center with a green roof. Well, it also, all our kayaks will be stored there, but a green roof and solar electric and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad you've done stuff in Green Lane. I hope we can get, we needed a conservancy and get a copy of that so we can fit into that someday.
And it's being used, that's gonna be a foundation. The Green Lane Park Master Plan is getting started right now. And I know Peter Simone is aware of the study and he's gonna be using that and hopefully expanding on it to the rest of the park.
Yeah.
And I know Ryan doesn't need any special accolades, but he's been great partner in all this as well.
Yeah, we can, given some lead time, supply volunteers to different things within the watershed. We had to turn people away on our cleanup because we didn't have enough group leaders and ability to get the trash when people collected it.
But that's part of the capacity we want to continue to build on and expand. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments out there in Zoom land?
Hey, Dulcie, it's John. Boy, it would be very hard to sit through a presentation as extensive and as powerful as this and say I have no comments. I can't thank the team enough to be able to put this together and to spend the time and the long years of constantly going back and forth. And as a municipal manager, boy, I know the challenges that you guys had to go through to get to this level. I appreciate the effort. I'm looking forward to getting a better understanding of how Lansdale can incorporate, some of these concepts and some of these initiatives in our own municipality. And I will save my comments about my thoughts on treescapes and street trees to another meeting. But I do want to say that I very much appreciate the effort and the product. It's really powerful and very important for the county. So thank you.
Thanks, John.
That's great. That logo, I keep looking at it.
It's beautiful.
Should we be making key rings or necklaces or pins or something? I mean, it's.
All of a sudden the logo, isn't the
I
logo
think
super?
that,
Love that.
if you work for stewardship in this region, you'll get one of these goodies. I think we need to make them.
Go to the 3D printer. Anastasia did the logo. Great.
Oh, wow. So,
Anastasia.
well, thank you again.
Yeah. And there's it's not over. We're just.
So, well.
Wow. I was putting my bets down that we would end early today, but a lot of good stuff worth going through. So I do have my director's report.
We can still do.
I was planning on time, so I've been taking notes. Like, I gotta.
No, we're fine. Steven's not here. I'm not gonna take out the wet noodle. You're fine.
Yeah, I can do it in 8 minutes or less. But there are some things I want to bring up. First, just an update on the Montgo 2040 grant program, which we are in the middle of that committee with its Herculean job of evaluating all the applications and making recommendations. Are about right in the middle. We had our first meeting, 3-hour session, which got through about a little more than half of the applications. The second meeting of that nature is on Friday afternoon. So thanks again for everyone for helping us participate in that. Hopefully we'll have our recommendations or need just one little tie-up meeting after that to finish that. I'll just go in order of what I have here. SRPRA, the authority to pursue passenger rail service from Philadelphia to Reading through Montgomery County and through Pottstown and Norristown. is the quarter ID application was submitted last month. So we are officially in the FRA consideration phase.
Acronyms, where's the
The
code book?
Federal Railway Administration is administering that program, and that is what will bring funding and planning opportunities to further and capital investment. Really the whole kit and caboodle to make it happen. If we get accepted into that, probably won't know till end of the summer though, officially. But signs are good. We are continuing to coordinate with Pottstown. We have a meeting next Tuesday with core stakeholders in Pottstown to continue talking about potential station area for that. And also there was an APA tour session as part of the national conference that went through each of the anchor station areas, including Pottstown. That was also very successful. I was out there along with Commissioner Lawrence and members of Pottstown to greet them. It was a great event. The upcoming, this was just being planned out now. I don't think it's logistically all set, but we have Representative Dean bringing Mitch Landrieu, who has filled many roles in our nation, but currently is the White House lead for the IIJA in this administration. So she is attempting to bring him out here next Friday to do a quick tour and see some of the projects or ideas around the Conshohocken area. We brought her out about 1.5 years ago to look at some of those. So she remembered that and wanted to take that opportunity to let him know about what's happening in Montgomery County and what could happen. So we're preparing for that very quickly, but that's a great opportunity, hopefully, with some good ears and press. Speaking of the IIJA, just one update for this month. One of the programs, the CFI, which stands for Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program. This goes back to our EV, electric vehicle issues. This is a program that has about 500 million going out to mainly municipal or local government projects to install infrastructure. So DVRPC is putting together an application for the region, and they emailed all the municipal managers to say, if you have a project that fits in this, we want to package them together and hopefully elevate our opportunity through partnership. So that email went out a week or so ago. Basically, it was municipality would need to have a project already in mind or have been thinking about one. And now there's some funding that could help with that. So they're looking for a response by April 19th. The actual application is not due on May 30th, but we'll take some coordination. So we are in on that as well, our staff, transportation staff, and we'll assist or coordinate as needed for those interested and available to take advantage of it. The National Planning Conference was last week and a half ago, over the weekend, April 1st through 4th. I've been talking about it at these times leading up to it. It was a resounding success, incredible effort by some of our staff, by regional planners and state planners as a whole, as well as the national APA team. We ended up with 4 education sessions that we essentially ran or participated in, as well as 8 mobile workshops. We were involved with and an orientation tour. Chloe was here earlier. I know she led one. We were able to send 20 planners on staff, which is awesome. It did take some effort, but again, participating in those sessions helped out with defraying the cost. But I was there all 4 days and learned a lot and had a lot of opportunities, as well as seeing great people. So we're coming down from that and rebounding off of it, also, but coming away with a lot of inspiration and hopefully some education as well. Bit of business, the hazard mitigation plan was approved by FEMA pending municipal adoption, which will happen tonight. Springfield is our partner in this. All we need is one municipality to adopt it to make it official in FEMA's eyes. However, once that happens, we will be seeking the adoption from all 61 other municipalities, which for the previous plan we were able to get and expect to get this time as well. The county commissioners will be considering it for adoption at the April 20th County Board of Commissioners meeting. Another visit upcoming on May 11th. We have the new director of DVRPC who started in February, Ariella Marin. She is going to come out and have a meet and greet. Some of myself and Matt will give her a tour of the county in a way, or not a tour of the county. We're going to get out and show her some things that I think are good for her to know about.
Is she local or
She lives in Philadelphia. She has worked in New York and Philadelphia. I don't think she has had living experience in Montgomery County or our suburbs that much. So I think there's gonna be a lot of good things we want to show her, as well as show her, the things that we're working on and the some of the challenges. So, and then we'll sit down with Commissioner Lawrence, who is the newly appointed board member for DVRPC, replacing Valor Cush. And we'll have a conversation with them as well. Reminder, statements of financial interest. I think Karina sent a reminder yesterday. That is due May 1st. When you do that, you can do it online. Be sure to forward the confirmation email to Karina. I think she has 2 of the board members right now. So we have about 3 weeks to get that finalized. Some great funding news. We had the local share account, which is a statewide account based on gaming revenue, and has been taken almost a year, essentially a year from the application to the awards. We did get the awards last month, and I feel Montgomery County did very well. The Planning Commission itself was involved with 4 applications. All 4 were funded. They include capacity study money for the SRPRA of $250,000, $1 million for the cross-county trail at Erdenheim, aiding construction efforts for a 1-mile section. $1 million towards the White Marsh floodplain restoration project, which stems from damage done during Hurricane Ida. And $500,000 to go towards the Trail Junction Center here in Norristown and renovating that building, which the architectural plans are wrapping up right now, and we'll be excited to bring that project to construction and renovation.
So for how much total?
Total for those 4 were $2.75 million. I should also say that municipalities were allowed to apply and also did very well. We had $18.6 million in total go to Montgomery County through that program. Throw on top, because they announced it in the same day and same table, multimodal fund and DCED also provided $2.4 million municipal projects. So really an excellent haul by all standards, and a good opportunity with that program. Pottstown was recently or just announced this week as part of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Thriving Communities program. I was a part of that. I and other staff were part of that application process with Pottstown as the lead applicant. The Planning Commission and the Pottstown Health and Wellness Foundation are the partner teams on that application. We were chosen out of they chose 60-some communities throughout the country. Only 2 in Pennsylvania were chosen. Chester City was the other. And this will provide capacity building resources and a firm. It's pretty complex, but there's basically 15 communities grouped in this category of networked communities. And this firm is given $5 million to help those 15 become attain more infrastructure resources, as well as capacity building through staff and partners. So
Don't understand.
Well, we're going to learn more at the kickoff, but we applied for it. It's basically to aid infrastructure investment and to build up, like, capacity is the word I would use and the word they use. So it's both training existing staff and using the resources of this firm to tap into all these available programs that could avail. There'll be planning efforts associated as well, which will be partially our role to determine where and how to best advance infrastructure investment in a community like Pottstown.
So not only to train their staff, but also to identify funding sources to fund infrastructure needs?
Yes, and to plan for them beyond what's already
So
been
it's a
done.
planning, but not an implementation.
No, it will cross into that, but
Okay.
it's not money handed out to build capital projects. It's to put you in a position to get that money through various. Honestly, it's like, there were like 450 places that wanted to do it, including in this area, and the fact that Pottstown made it is big.
Oh, it's great. I mean, I
And our angle on it was, we think it's a great opportunity to merge with the Schuylkill River passenger rail effort,
Okay.
because now that if
It's a
that
driver.
becomes a reality, there's a lot more planning, I think, that we need to start doing, take advantage of that. So, anyway, and finally, two last things. Because you mentioned the Perkiomen Watersheds Cleanup Day, which is in 2 days on Friday. Our staff, we started last year, we wanted a community service project as both a good thing and a bonding experience. So last year we were out at Riverfront Park in Norristown for a cleanup effort. They were welcoming us back to do it again this year. So we're gonna be there on Friday morning for several hours, helping with cleanup efforts there. As part of that Perkiomen watershed effort. So excited about that. And so if we show up dirty to the afternoon meeting, that's why, or in our jeans and.
okay, that's okay.
And then finally, America 250, which is the celebration of America's 250th anniversary in 2026. The county has is forming its own stakeholder committee on that. The kickoff meeting, which has a very wide invitation list, and some of you may actually be on it, is on April 24th. And we're not running that, but we are involved with it. So we'll be kind of getting our bearings and seeing how they want to form several subcommittees and who's going to be involved and what to do over the next we say over the next 2 years, because 2026 is 2.5 years. But really, it's an effort that might go beyond that. There's a lot of history in Montgomery County that happened right after 1776. The Valley Forge Park is really, its critical year was 1777. So we feel this is an effort that's going to both be important and continue beyond just one point in time.
Is it a summer celebration? Is that what it is? Or
It'll be year long.
it's year long? Okay.
And like
It's
I
not,
said,
it's like not a one.
yeah, and I think it'll go beyond, it'll definitely go beyond that year as
Okay.
far as specific things. If you heard about that, or if you're interested, or that support, we're welcoming all. I think there's a list of over 100 people right now that got an email. But please, let me know if that's something you want to be a part of. That's it.
No staff information?
No staff. I wish I had new announcements. We've had
Okay.
a couple on the wire, and for various reasons didn't come through. So we're still looking for
Okay.
few positions.
Well, before we leave, any comments from our members out there, or is everyone left? Okay. And we
I'm
adjourn.
good, thank you.
Have a
I'm
nice
still here.
one. We'll see you on May 10th. I hope maybe some people in person. It's getting to be spring. You don't have to take a dog sled down here anymore. So May 10th, put it on your calendar, and we can adjourn through common consent. If it's okay with everyone here.
Yep. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All
Thank
good.
you.
Thank
Stay
you.
well.
Everybody have a good week.
You
Have a
too.
nice week, folks.